Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is Sunday, September 24th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have so much to talk about tonight. I can't even with the last week. I imagine I'm not the only one, but we're going to try to get through as much as we possibly can before we open it up to our open mic, which we absolutely will once we get through I don't even know what to call it. Once we get through all the things, because there's a lot of things that we definitely need to get through tonight. But we're going to start with the fast stuff, the stuff we can move through quickly, nimbly, if you will. Because there have been some light, but still noteworthy developments, not the least of which, as we get right into it, is the announcement from Alberta Green Party leader Jordan Wilkie. He's stepping down, moved to BC, because everybody is these days. It seems like the need for people to get the heck out of the province just keeps growing. Jordan Wilkie, of course, led the Alberta Greens in the last provincial election, got them to one of the highest finishes they've ever had. And now he's going to go work for the Greens in BC. I mean, you're hard pressed to find anything bad to say about Jordan, except that it's just unfair that a man that handsome is also a firefighter and he's leaving the province. Sorry, ladies, he is already married though, with kids. Delightful family, I'm told. So that's what we're going to start with. So best of luck, best of wishes to the Alberta Greens. That's another party that's going to be having a leadership race. So far, confirmed, the Alberta Party, although the date and time and specificness hasn't been announced. Mind you, the Alberta Party has been kind of quiet this month. They haven't really said anything since the beginning of the month, which is super strange because, there's been some pretty major developments, cough, pension plan, cough, nationwide, hate protest, cough, lots of things the Alberta Party historically would have weighed in onto, but apparently they're not wading into to anything. They're just staying on the beach, the shore for the time being. Do with that what you will. But the Alberta Party, we had Barry Morshida on the show. He confirmed he's going to be stepping down as leader. The Green Party now, the Liberals, I believe, although we're going to get some clarification on that in an upcoming episode right quick here. They had a leadership race that nobody showed up for, and their interim leader got promoted to the permanent leader. Regular leader. Whether or not that's going to remain, we're going to find out, hopefully, in just a short little bit of time here. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, the big one everybody's waiting for. It's like the worst kept secret in Alberta politics that at some point in the next 2 years, 3 years, the Alberta NDP are likely going to be having a little bit of a leadership race. There's all kinds of rumors and questions about the start date. Some people are saying October, some people are saying January, but the one thing is that everybody's saying is that it is going to come. So it's very possible, depending on how Danielle Smith does with her party and a leadership review that may or may not be down the road, it's very possible we could be heading into the next election with entirely new commodities, which would be a fascinating place to be in the province of Alberta. But anyways, best of luck to Jordan. Now we get into it. Adriana LaGrange, the Minister of Health, still doesn't feel right to say that. She had a busy little week. She announced some things. One of the things that she announced, she put out a tweet saying it was great to meet with the Chiropractic Association of Alberta. And then there's double spaces for reasons, to discuss the role of chiropractics within Alberta's primary care system. I look forward to our future discussions. I'm just going to, one sec. Let's bring that up. Let's start moving this sucker forward because it's going to be a night. Chiropractors aren't doctors. There, I said it. We'll start hot and we'll work our way from there. So the reality is the practice of chiropractic, new word, chiropractic is fictional mostly. There's some arguments to be made that for chiropractors, there's some benefits if somebody's experiencing lower back pain. But let's just turn to our handy dandy Wikipedia page and see what it says about chiropractic. practice. A chiropractor may have a Doctor of Chiropractic, DC degree, and be referred to as, and they're literally quote, putting it in quotes, doctor, but is not a doctor of medicine, MD, or a doctor of osteopathic medicine, DO. While many chiropractors view themselves as primary care providers, chiropractic clinical training does not meet the requirements for that designation. Systematic reviews of controlled clinical studies of treatments used by chiropractors found no evidence that chiropractic manipulation is effective, with the possible exception of treatment for back pain. A 2011 critical evaluation of 45 systemic reviews concluded that the data included in the study failed to demonstrate convincingly that spinal manipulation is an effective intervention for any condition. And that's not even going into the whole history of chiropractic. That's going to be my new word. I'm going to write that down somewhere. Because when you actually start to go down the rabbit hole of how chiropractic came to be a thing, it's pretty wild, man. It's right up there with like the origin story for Scientology, and I'm not even joking. Go read it for yourselves. Don't believe me. But it's pretty wild. Given that this is one of the things that Danielle Smith campaigned on during her leadership race. She was going to bring in all the woo science. Everybody gets a free amethyst. I don't know. And now we're starting to see movements to integrate people who identify as doctors into the primary care network. Because all of the evidence that is available says, you know what, at best, they're basically doing the same work as a massage therapist. At worst, they're actually causing real harm and sometimes death. So that's a fascinating choice by the new health minister. Wonder where she's getting those marching orders from. Not really. It's pretty clear where she's getting those marching orders from. But here's one of the big pieces of news that we got to talk about, because we said just a couple weeks ago, hey, that social studies curriculum, man, nobody knows what's going on there. Somebody should probably find out what the deal is, because there's questions and stuff. Well, it turns out there's going to be some consultation that goes on. Dimitris Nicolaides, Minister of Education, announced Alberta's government is beginning a transparent and collaborative engagement process with Albertans and education partners to redraft the K-6 social studies curriculum. And then a bunch of words about how they're going to actually do some consultation. Now, where this gets to be really important, where this gets to be really relevant for Albertans, is the fact that we've seen what happens looking at the previous social studies curriculum and some of the other curriculum. We've seen what happens when there isn't that engagement. So if, and I'm just saying maybe, let's be optimistic for a second here. If this is a sincere offer, if Dimitris Nicolaides is sincere about getting actual consultation on the social studies curriculum, when those opportunities start to become available, it's going to be critically important that anyone who cares about the future of social studies education in the province of Alberta shows up and makes their voices heard. Because based on what we saw this week, and yep, we're going to be getting into that in a bit, there are going to be other voices that are maybe not so interested in evidence-based or actual history or anything like that, who will be showing up. So it's up to Albertans who do want to see a quality curriculum show up and make their voices heard. It's like we talked about it last week, and then all of a sudden, bam, it happens. It's crazy. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the War Room. As if it wasn't bad enough that the Alberta War Room decided at a point in time that they were going to go to war with animated Bigfoot. I wish I was joking. But again, we have to remember that this is the same organization that stole their logo not once, not twice, but allegedly 3 times. They kind of tweaked it to get away with the third one. During their launch, the War Room has had no shortage of scandal. They seem to just want to stay in the news for all the wrong reasons, because a story broke this week how the Alberta War Room was actually putting money towards influencing municipal elections, not just municipal elections, but municipal elections in other provinces. They were putting money towards a letter writing campaign that happened during the municipal elections in Nanaimo. Now, it's important to remember the whole reason that the war room became, well, the whole reason that the war room was justified in the first place, not just because it's a really convenient way to dump millions of dollars into pet programs that nobody can ever actually find out about what's going on because you can't FOIP it because they built it that way because transparency or something. The whole reason that the war room was initiated was because, Alberta, we're the greatest in the history of great, and people keep trying to mess with us. We have all these other provinces, all these other countries. Can you even imagine? They're trying to mess with our economy. They're trying to mess with our democracy. They're trying to influence how our elections go. How horrifying is that? We must fight back. It was part of Jason Kenney's fight back strategy. The whole idea of having a war room to out the outside influences that were trying to mess with our economy and our democracy. And what's that? Oh, look, that's exactly what the war room's doing. It's becoming increasingly clear. Not only are the folks who are running the war room grossly incompetent, they're definitely not interested or equipped enough to put Alberta's best foot forward to the world. Because if there is anything that the war room has accomplished, it's going back on their founding principles, or at least their stated founding principles, and embarrassing the province and the country over and over and over again. Moving on from there. Another little story that fell through the cracks in a lot of ways, but it's kind of important. There's a company called Tallahassee Explorations. And on September 15th, 2023, the AER issued a reasonable care and measures order to Tallahassee Exploration, Inc., as the company has repeatedly failed to comply with regulatory requirements and address compliance issues in a timely manner. And what they put in the order is really quite telling, especially when you take into consideration that we're in like month 2, 1.5 of Danielle Smith's moratorium on renewable energy. So just as a reminder, as we go through this story, Danielle Smith made the rules. Hey, you know what? We're going to put a moratorium on renewable energy. Then she tried to blame a bunch of people. Didn't stick with any of them. Nobody really knows what the impetus for this was other than Smith and maybe Rob Anderson. But that's speculation. But no power plants over 1 megawatt are allowed to be approved for 7 months while people figure out how are we going to deal with the environmental impacts of green energy. Also, some people don't like how it looks. But let's go through the Tallahassee order. The AER's order requires Tallahassee to take several actions, which include submitting a plan outlining all actions it will take to properly manage its sites, address outstanding compliance issues, ensure ability to respond to an incident or emergency, and perform remedial work related to previous incidents. Submitting an abandonment plan with specific actions and timelines for all overdue mineral lease expired wells within 6 months from the date of this order. Complete delineation for historical spills and submit a plan for remedial action relating to those incidents. And provide written updates every 2 weeks to the AR with details on the progress of the work required under the order. It's the last one that's really quite telling. Complete delineation for historical spills. So there have been spills under Tallahassee Energy's watch, and a plan for remedial action related to those incidents. So not only have there been spills, but there's been spills that still need work to be done. Now, there's some people who like to say, spill, that's just when you get an unexpected amount of the resource. You know what they call a spill of wind in southern Alberta? Well, they call it a day that ends in Y. It's very windy there. But that's the difference. That's the fundamental difference. If there's too much of the resource of wind or solar, it's a nice day or it's a windy day. Moving on from there. Next up, you thought that the mountains were safe. There was a whole thing. We had an election, and there were people talking about the mountains. And you know what? We managed to chase away those Benga mining folks. Except no, we didn't. They're back. They've changed their name. It's Benga's. It seems like they're kind of like the guy at the club who the bouncer says, "No, you can't come in," and then they go back and quickly chalk on a mustache and then try to get back to the door, but they haven't really fooled anyone. They've come back with the same proposal for the same things that they wanted to do. Reading from the CBC story, back when it was called Benga Mining, the company applied for developmental permissions on Grassy Mountain. Federal and provincial entities responded with a two-part refusal. In June 2021, the AAR said the open pit coal project wasn't in the public interest. Then a federal review of the proposition found that it was likely to cause unjustified, severe environmental damage. So we're not just talking about a little bit of the environmental, we're talking about severe environmental damage on water quality, a threatened species of trout, and endangered a variety of pine trees. Well, as we talked about at the beginning of the week, they're back. Here's their application, and on their application, it even makes it very, very clear that they are formally known as the now called Northback Holdings Corporation, operating out of Blairmore, but they're now going under the name Northback, which is a trick that we've seen over and over and over again when it comes to mineral and resource extraction. If somebody gets into a little bit of trouble, then they go, we'll just create a new company and we'll try it again. You'd think of all of the things that could be addressed, all of the loopholes that could be closed, all of the environmental issues that the provincial government could choose to put some energy, time, resources into. Closing loopholes like chalking a mustache on might be one of those things that they choose to address. But here we are, and the whole conversation about the mining in the mountains is right back on the table. Now, it's also important to remember when we're talking about this, that this was an issue that Danielle Smith, again, during her leadership race, she was really quite fond of. She did a whole speaking gig down in Blairmore where she talked about, hey, you know what, maybe the coal mining, the miners seem to want the coal mines. Maybe we should listen to those folks instead of all of the environmental experts and all of the people whose water would be affected and all of the ranchers and everything else. There's like 30 people that were at a meeting. They seem serious. Moving on from there, the big show, second big show, third big show. Like I said, it was a busy week. Got to talk about the World Petroleum Congress, hosted in Calgary, Alberta, from September 17th to the 21st. A lot of people thought it was going to be a really big deal. A lot of people thought there was going to be protests related to the WPC. It turns out it was nothing but a warm welcome, even when some people entered the room a little bit on the hot side. The Saudis came in. They came to Calgary, warning of the consequences of ditching oil. You don't want to ditch oil. You don't want to do that. You never know what could happen. It's not like Saudi Arabia has a record for unconventional means of getting what they want, let's say. But what was really fascinating was how quickly Danielle Smith embraced the Saudis. She even made a point of greeting them, apparently, at the airport, where she put a tweet. I was delighted to welcome His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman Al Saud to Calgary, Alberta this morning for the World Petroleum Congress. She went there to meet him at the plane. Now, that's good Albertan hospitality, but it raises some questions. Because one of the things that Danielle Smith and the United Conservative Party for quite some time have been banging on about is the whole idea of ethical oil. Danielle Smith has tweeted about it twice in the last 18 months. It's certainly been a talking point in many speeches. Certainly has been a talking point in the UCP leadership debate. Certainly was a talking point in the last provincial election. Oh, Alberta with our ethical oil. We're so ethical. And the argument for ethical oil actually comes from, in a completely not surprising turn of events, a book that was written by Danielle Smith's bestie. It just gets so tiring so quickly. Ezra Levant. Ezra Levant wrote the book back in 2010, Ethical oil, the case for Canada's oil sounds. And the whole thing was predicated on the argument that, well, you know what? We treat our workers really well and we don't tend to behead people, letting women drive and everything. And there were a lot of direct comparisons and indirect comparisons between Alberta's record on human rights and countries like Saudi Arabia's record on human rights. Danielle Smith, she's been using the ethical oil argument. And in fact, just to put the cherry on top, after Danielle Smith made a point of apparently going to the airport to meet the prince, how did she wrap up her experience with the World Petroleum Congress? Well, she put out a tweet. The World Petroleum Congress has concluded and was a smashing success. Alberta was honored to host delegates from around the world, and we will continue to provide ethical energy to the world responsibly. So it's almost as if the ethical oil argument is nothing more than a convenient argument to make us feel better about ourselves, when you actually take a look at Alberta's track record when it comes to resource development, we're not the greatest. We're just not. When you take a look at the fact that the government of Canada and Alberta, in many ways, demonized the Wet'suwet'en folks who were just trying to defend their land that technically belongs to them. We're talking about the fact there's been no informed conversations in the province of Alberta about what unceded territories are at the higher levels of government. You've never seen Danielle Smith talk about unceded territories. She just talks about how she was told at the dinner table one time that she might have some First Nations Cherokee going on. And also, our First Nations are just the best. We don't hear the conversations about the uglier parts of how Alberta got to resource development. And to be clear, there are obviously countries in the world that are way worse than Alberta's track record. But when you have the premier, multiple premiers, because Jason Kenney did it too, and when you have the right media, I guess, I still haven't landed on what to call them. I liked creative writers. I think we used that last week. When we have the right creative writers involved in media constantly banging the drum on the ethical oil, and we have to stand up to the evils of Russia. We have to stand up to the evils of Saudi Arabia. But as soon as the plane touches down, there's Danielle Smith ready with a big shit-eating grin on her face to say, "Hey, welcome to Alberta. So happy you're here." It's almost as if that's directly correlated to who holds a significant amount of shares in Alberta's, particularly oil sands development. But that would just be a crazy coincidence, I'm sure. Moving on from there. Definitely need a drink for this part. We need to talk about what happened on Wednesday, because it turned out to be a much bigger event than what anyone was anticipating in regards to the World Petroleum Congress. And what we're talking about is the Million March for Children. Now, the original plan, as advertised, was that there were going to be 1 million Canadians who showed up to say, "Hey, we won't stand for this woke progress stuff no more." And it's really important to highlight in that most of the country, the counter protesters, the people who showed up to say, "Yeah, we'd really like it not to be 1952 anymore," outnumbered the protesters, the people who were there for the Million March for Children. But it wasn't that way in Calgary. And there have been a lot of people who have asked a lot of questions. And one of the things that keeps coming up is, what were these things about? And the truth is, it's about a lot of different things. So as we talked about on the show before, one of the things that COVID-19 unfortunately gave people the opportunity to do, the fringe, as they sometimes like to call themselves, I'm not sure if they're doing it satirically or not, but the more extreme views, the conspiracy theorists, what it gave them the opportunity to do was organize and get to know each other And social media gave them a network by which they could all get connected and all kind of team up and overlook each other's bullshit so that they could push ahead on whatever it was that the issue was. Now, obviously, for COVID-19, for most people, it was vaccinations. It was vaccination passports. That's where the conspiracy theorists spent a lot of their time. But they also went down the WEF rabbit hole. They also went down the 5G microchip and the vaccines rabbit hole. So we're talking about an incredibly diffuse group of people who just feel like they've been wronged. And ever since COVID-19, they've been looking for what's the next thing that I can get pissed off over? What's the next thing? How am I going to be able to justify my Sunday or my Wednesday freedom walks when I don't have a group of 60 people to come with me? And unfortunately, one of the things that they've latched onto is something that is straight up imported from the United States with regards to supportive care for trans kids. And there's a lot of bullshit that is going on in this conversation. But that's the highest level that it's hedged under. If you talk to the leaders and you put a camera on them, they'll tell you, you know what this is about? This is about, we don't want our kids being turned trans. We don't want our kids being turned into something that we don't want them to be. And there's a fundamental core of this argument that hasn't been particularly well addressed. And that fundamental core is, do you believe, do you accept the science, the evidence, everything else that exists that says there's more than just this binary state of being for gender and sexuality? Which is not to say that there's not people out there who are super binary. As I pointed out many times on the show, I'm about as cis, straight, white, male, middle-aged peak privilege as you can possibly get. But I don't begrudge anybody who's not. And I accept that the science supports that there's a lot more than just my particular flavor of vanilla that's out there. And that's a really important piece to understand, because either you accept that people exist on a spectrum or you don't. And this is where the crux of it all really starts to lie. Because the reality is, as much as the people who are organizing these protests are hedging it, and as we'll see, even that hedging is by and large absolutely bullshit. They're hedging it under the argument, we don't want our kids being turned trans or being influenced. The fundamental question that I have for these people is, if you believe, to these organizers, if you believe that somebody can be turned trans or turned gay, or they can make a choice to whatever, what would it take to make you enjoy? If we've got one of the organizers, most of the organizers are men. I wonder what it would take to convince one of those men to enjoy intimate relations with another man. And I bet you if you asked them, they'd say, there's absolutely nothing that could make me do that. I would never choose to do that. And the truth is, that's either the truth for them. They could also be horribly repressed, who knows? But you can't force someone to change who they're attracted to. That's why conversion therapy fails. That's why this whole conversation isn't about choices. What we're talking about when we're talking about acknowledging the existence, which isn't a big ask, of anybody who's not binary, cis, is that you're just acknowledging that these people exist and that it's not a choice. They are who they are, which shouldn't be a big ask. But as we saw this week across the country, and particularly in Calgary, there are some people who don't believe that. And what's most horrifying is that they're teaching their kids that. There is no universe where this kid wakes up and decides, you know what I want to do today? Because I want to. Because I'm 7 or 8. I want to make a sign of my own volition that says, kick the gays out of the country. And there's no universe where a kid that young puts that sign in a vehicle and drives themselves down to the protest. This is something that had to have parental involvement, period. And that in and of itself should be enough to make the case that there needs to be better education so that kids don't get put in positions where they're saying, holding up signs that say, kick the gays out of the country, or worse, saying things like this.
Listen to them, they tell us what they want to be, not whatever those guys accuse us of. What do you like to say?
I like to say that the gays are psychopaths and we're not psychopaths.
No, that's not true.
One more thing to say.
No, that's not good.
The gays, they are disgusting.
What's that mean?
Now you can hear the voice of the one woman in the background who's saying, no, that's not good. And that's good. I question why she's there. But at least one person in that crowd recognized that what that kid was saying was completely inaccurate and completely hateful. But that's the same kid who was holding up this sign. That's the same kid whose parents very clearly took him down there. Now, for obvious reasons, we're not showing this kid's face because this kid is obviously, I want to use the word, a victim of shitty parenting, of indoctrination. You want to talk about indoctrination? That's what the face of indoctrination is. That's the behavior that is indoctrination. But of course, that kid wasn't the only speaker there. Leader of Take Back Alberta. I hate that we have to talk about this guy as much as we do. We're not going to play David Parker's full speech because it's like 5.5 minutes long and so much of it you've already heard before. But there are a few clips that we pieced together. So to be clear, this isn't the full speech. If you want to watch the full speech, you can go to any of our social media. It's horrifying. The amount of anger and hate in this man's voice is absolutely off the charts. And one of the things that I want to be clear of, if you're looking at the video or if you're hearing when he's talking about them, he's pointing across the street at the counter-protesters. The counter-protesters who showed up to say, you know what, kids deserve to feel safe even when they have garbage parents.
Are you going to let their accusations of hate scare you? No! Are we going to take back this province? Yeah! Let me tell you something. The Muslims are with us. Yeah! The Sikhs are with us. Yeah! The Christians are cowards. That toxic ideology is consuming our society. Yeah! They have taken over our justice system. They have taken over our education system. They have taken over our healthcare system. And I tell them this, we are coming and we will not stop until all of you are unelected. Yeah! We will destroy the unions. Yeah! We will destroy this horrible, hateful ideology that is castrating our children. We will drive this toxic ideology out of our schools if we have to fire every principal in the province to do it. Yeah! We will drive them out of our school administrations. We will drive them out of our bureaucracy. This is my message to you. Do not listen to the mainstream media. Alright? Do not believe them when they say that you are a small fringe minority with unacceptable views. They are the small fringe minority with unacceptable views. And I tell you this, we will defeat you.
So when he says we will defeat you, when he says they are the small fringe minority, for those of you who are listening to the audio version or you're on the Twitter Spaces right now, he's pointing directly at the counter-protesters. Now that's the whole thing is hard to listen to because It's a reality of what's happening in our province right now. And it's hard for me as a middle-aged, straight white guy to listen to. So I can only imagine how hard it would be for somebody who's not a straight, cisgendered white guy to hear that. I can only imagine how hard it would be to be a 12 or a 13-year-old kid and see that kind of hate and rhetoric directed at you. There's a lot of hypocrisy in what Mr. Parker had to say there. He opened with, "Don't let anyone tell you that your views are hateful," and then proceeds to point across the street to the people who are trying to make safe places for kids and calls them hateful. He calls the ideology that would see those kids protected hateful. It's fascinating how a man who says, "Don't let anyone ever call you hateful," really is comfortable throwing around the word hate at everybody who disagrees with him. He's playing straight out of a playbook. Don't believe the mainstream media. There's a checklist out there. You can go and look it up. What are the warning signs of a certain type of government? Mr. Parker manages to hit just about all of them. He talks about how healthcare has been infiltrated. As somebody who works in the healthcare system, that's just about the dumbest thing that I think I've ever heard. He talks about how the education system has been infiltrated. As somebody who has parents in the public education system, I can tell you, if anything, especially in elementary school, with the shift in curriculum, teachers are absolutely overwhelmed. Because of the way that the new curriculum is structured, kids are being expected to learn things that they haven't been taught yet and weren't supposed to be taught for another year. But because of the curriculum shift, that stuff got moved to the year before, and they're just in this nebulous limbo of sucks to be you, this is going to hurt. There's no teacher who has the kind of time that's required to change somebody's mind in the way that I talked about earlier. And again, I would love to not be talking about David Parker. I would love to let him just fall into irrelevance and obscurity. But the reality of David Parker is he knows people. David Parker, for anybody who hasn't been listening, if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. You picked a hell of a one to join us on. David Parker is the person who takes credit for getting rid of Jason Kenney as leader of the UCP. David Parker is the person who takes credit for Danielle Smith being installed as the new leader of the UCP. And if you think that those sorts of claims are unfounded, you only have to talk to the people on the inside of those things, and they'll say, yeah, no, dude knows how to mobilize people. He knows how to get people angry, as you saw from that speech. Now, that's a very different David Parker than the one that we saw on Jesperson, but it's the same guy. He's just unrestrained because he's got an audience that he knows digs what he's saying. He's not trying to convince anyone there. He's trying to fire people up. This is the same David Parker who had Danielle Smith in March of this year, I think it was March, earlier this year, attend his wedding. This is not a random guy standing on a street corner preaching hate. This is a guy standing on a street corner preaching hate who is connected to some very, very powerful people. And we have already seen in this province that Danielle Smith is afraid of people like David Parker. Because when she first got to office, she called the justice minister at the time and tried to get him to make the charges against Artur Pawlowski go away because she was afraid of what the backlash could look like. That's the reality of who David Parker is. And he can't just be dismissed. But he's also, it's worth noting, not the credited organizer of the event. That person is Mahmoud Moura. And Mahmoud likes to say You know what? I'm just trying to protect the kids. I got nothing against the gays. I think they're great. I just want them to leave me and my kids alone. That's all I'm after. Except that's not exactly true, because Mr. Moura, at least looking at his multiple Facebook accounts, I've never seen anyone have like 3 or 4 Facebook accounts and then tag themselves in their posts so that they appear on their multiple timelines. It's kind of wild going through this dude's social media, but a lot of that has to do with the content. As we've highlighted before, Mr. Moura very clearly has some anti-Semitic views. We shared this picture before. The freedom of social media, Mr. Moura titles. And then you see a hand of Facebook covering a person's mouth, and then a hand of Instagram covering a person's mouth, and then a hand with the Star of David choking them. No stranger to conspiracy theories. Mr. Moura posted, and this is the caption again, similar situation, media control people's minds. And then it's a graphic of the World Trade Centers after the 2 planes that hit, and a picture of a kid in a mask. And the caption of the photo is, people who believe 2 planes caused these to collapse now look like this. But of course, Mr. Moore's got some strong views, it appears, on vaccination as well, the most effective weapon. And then he's got a graphic that shows the weapons of war, the evolution of war. And it starts with a rock and a spear and an arrow and a bullet and a missile and then a syringe. It's also worth noting Mr. Moura was very active in the freedom folks in Calgary protesting against organizations that were trying to get people vaccinated. But he talks about I got nothing against the LGBTQ. I have no beef with them. Except again, it sure looks like he does. Science facts, Y or X chromosomes. There is nothing in between. Well, science would like to have a word with you, Mr. Moura, because you're absolutely wrong. But the caption to the photo is Y or X. There's nothing in between. Abnormal is the new normal. He's got a petition with Cinderella in a beard, and then she's also got some lingerie on, it appears, with, of course, rainbow flag in the background. If you're a Muslim, you must sign this. Tell Disney to stop poisoning our kids' minds and souls. Keep your sexual identity to yourself. But he takes it a step farther, because Mr. Moore apparently believes there's no such thing as LGBTQ2S plus Muslims. The faith in God and LGBTQ matters can't meet together. If you choose the first, you must lose the second, and vice versa. Now, again, if Mr. Moura was just a fringe nutter who preaches hate, he would be much easier to dismiss. But he's not. When you take a look at who Mr. Moura hangs out with, here he is campaigning with Mohammed Yassin with a Go Danielle poster. He's got pictures of himself and Brian Jean all over both of his profiles. And he campaigned in 2019 for current Justice Minister, Mickey Amory. Here he is in a picture with Jason Kenney. But of course, that's not the end of the Amory legacy now, is it? Because he also appeared in pictures with Mickey Amory and Danielle Smith very recently. But of course, we don't even have to go into his old social media to figure out that when Mr. Moura says it's just about let's keep the trans stuff away, that's just what he says when he's in front of the big microphone.
Actually, the union want to sexualize and indoctrinate our children's. So for every parent, I want to tell out there, for every member of this union who has kids, you need to be extra careful. Our battle now against these unions, and we need to put the stop for them. And I want to encourage every parent. The protest that happened September 20 is just a first step. We're not ending here. We're not stopping. So I just want to tell each and every one of you, when you go out there for any mall, for any store, we're not just a keyboard pusher. We are the power. We are the people. So when you walk into that store and you don't belong to any union, to any service, just send a message. We are boycotting this because of your union, what it did to us. And if you see that multicolored flag, it's about time to hold that business responsible for what they are doing to our kids. Before we never called for that, but I know now it's something we need to call for, to boycott these businesses and hold them accountable. Let's see who's going to have a longer breath. Let's see who needs our businesses and our money.
So Mr. Mora makes it pretty clear. It's about unions all of a sudden. Now, Mr. Mora is not just worried about the indoctrination of the kids. He wants people to fight against unions. He wants people to boycott any institution that uses a union, which will be fascinating if anyone ever needs health care. Mind you, health care is all infiltrated by the woke progressives, according to David Parker, so maybe they wouldn't avail themselves of that if they needed to. I would hope they would. He wants you to boycott any stores that have that multicolored flag. So all of a sudden, now it's not just about, oh, we got to fight back against the unions. We got to now punish any store that dares to voice support for the LGBTQ plus community by putting a pride flag in their store. And he wants people to not only boycott those stores, but apparently go into them and say, this is why I'm boycotting you. And as many people of social media have pointed out, that might not be an entirely bad thing, because if all the bigots don't go into the stores with the pride flags, maybe we just need to put up a bunch more pride flags. We'll have a bunch more places where we won't have to worry about this bullshit. But of course, the reality is they will still come in. They will still stamp their feet. They will still try to make noise, and God knows they'll absolutely film it all. This isn't about just protecting the kids. This is about an anti-LGBTQ2S plus agenda. This is about an anti-union agenda. This is about an anti-mainstream media agenda. And if you Google those things, you'll find yourself on that checklist that I talked about earlier pretty quick. And again, if it was just a small group of people, it wouldn't be nearly as much concern. But we also saw MLA Jason Steffen, who couldn't be bothered to show up to be sweared in at the legislature after he won in the election. But he could be bothered to show up for the Red Deer version of this march that took place on steps. I mean, you don't want to go too far. UCP MLA Jason Steffen, who also couldn't be bothered to pay his legal fees on time, or his lawyer registration fees to the Law Society on time. He couldn't be bothered to do that stuff. He showed up for this, though. He was his keynote speaker. And when people tried to say to the UCP caucus, hey, maybe that's a little offside, the UCP said, hey, you know what? He's just saying his thing. We believe in parental choice. But Jason Steffen wasn't alone there. At the exact same rally, guest appearance in Red Deer by Monique LaGrange. Monique LaGrange, of course, the person who got in a little bit of hot water there for a while when she posted a picture comparing kids holding pride flags to kids holding Nazi flags. Now, and this is fascinating because there's been some misunderstandings, some misinformation that's gone on around Miss LaGrange. She was fired from the provincial body that is a collection of school board trustees. So that provincial board of school board trustees, where there's one from every area, one from every Catholic school board, they said, yeah, she's not going to fit in here anymore after that. That's well below our standards. We're not going to tolerate that. She was fired from that role. She does, however, remain a Red Deer Catholic School Board trustee. The Red Deer Catholic School Board tried to say to Education Minister Demetrius Nicolaides, hey, please fire her. And then Demetrius Nicolaides said, you've got the authority to do that under the Education Act. Why don't you do it? And it turns out that they don't have a mechanism within their bylaws as to how to do that. So it's kind of like they've got the Lego all the pieces to build a Lego set, but they don't have the instruction manual to actually build the Lego set. They're missing that important little, here's how you do it ingredient. So she remains a Catholic school board trustee, and she attended this march. But that's not the only thing that she attended. And again, this is another place where, look, all of these things start to slowly come together. Take Back Alberta had an event this week. And when we take a look at who the guest speakers were, 3 of the names we just finished talking about. There's David Parker, disappointingly not in a turtleneck. There's Monique LaGrange. There's Mahmoud Mora again. But it's also important to realize that we're not just talking about the fringe of the fringe, because one of the other things that got traction on social media was a story, an Instagram story from Brock Harrison. Million March for Kids. Schools don't decide what parents know about their children. And I would agree with that statement. Schools don't decide what parents know about their children. The relationship that exists between parents and children decides what parents know about their children. How safe kids feel in that relationship decides what parents know about their children. Important distinction. Who's Brock Harrison? Some of you might not know. Well, other than looking like the answer perhaps to the question, what would somebody who grew up to be a milkman and a serial killer look like? Brock Harrison has actually been involved in politics for quite some time. Not only was he the communications guy for Andrew Scheer, who also is the answer to many milkman serial killer questions, some might say. He also worked in the UCP government with Jason Kenney. And then when he left office, he got himself a little bit of job with the TC Energy folks. And this is, again, where it's pretty wild that he would be comfortable posting this on social media given his higher profile. Because it turns out TC Energy actually has a whole rule about creating a culture of inclusion. One of the bullet points on their website, we launched 4 employee-led. Sorry. Little glitch. We launched 4 employee-led employee inclusion networks focused on 2S LGBTQIA plus women, Indigenous peoples, and veterans to encourage connection around shared values and identities and amplify underrepresented voices. So TC Energy, they want to create a culture of inclusion. It seems like Brock is maybe flying a little bit in the face of that, but I don't know. I'm no expert. And that's where we get to our next video clip. Because Danielle Smith in a press conference on Thursday, and we're going to talk about that press conference in just a sec, had this to say.
Of a 1 million march.
Well, look, I mean, I'm sympathetic to parents who want to preserve the innocence of their kids for as long as they can. And that's part of the reason our school act allows for parents to have the choice to have their kids be exposed to topics of religion and sexuality at a pace that is their choice. That being said, we also know that sometimes these protests can get a little heated, and it's unfortunate if people take their opposition too far and cross the line. And there are mechanisms in law to make sure that that gets addressed if that's the case. But I look at what young kids must be thinking as they're watching these battles go on in the streets. And that's what I'm concerned about, is I think every kid needs to feel safe and protected and needs to know that they're supported in their choices. So we're trying to find the right balance. We're trying to depoliticize it. But I respect the right of people when they have these really complex, difficult discussions to have, that they do it in a civil way, and I'm supportive of that.
And here's the problem with that. It's not that complex. It's really not. It's actually really quite simple. In Canada, we believe that you have the right to religion, you have the right to not religion. And when we're talking about a lot of these people who attended these protests, hate rallies, whatever you want to call them, I mean, Mr. Parker said it himself. The Muslims are with us. The Sikhs are with us. Might want to learn the pronunciation of that word if you're going to invoke it there, Davey. It's very clearly about religion. And you're allowed to believe whatever it is that you want to believe. If you want to believe that on Easter, Jesus Christ rose from the dead, that's cool. If you want to believe on Easter that a goldfish flops across your floor and leaves Lincoln Logs in your sock drawer, that's okay to believe too. The line that we agree to in this country is that you don't get to impose your beliefs on other people. And as I said earlier, the question as to whether or not there's such a thing as anything other than straight people who are non-binary, there's only cisgendered straight people in the world, that is demonstrably, scientifically, provably false. To hold any other position is to hold a position of belief, period. And you're allowed to believe that. If that's what you want to believe, that's cool. But you don't get to enforce that belief on anyone else. That's the price of admission in Canada. If you want to be a part of this society that allows you to practice your religion or your not religion, when in other countries of the world you would absolutely face persecution and in some cases imprisonment and in some cases death for practicing your faith or your not faith, you can do that here in Canada. But in order to do that, you have to accept the other rules, the base rules that we've agreed to in our Constitution and in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And if you don't like that, if you refuse to accept those things that we as a nation have agreed upon, and it was no small doing getting to that point, a lot of drama getting there, you're welcome to move. That's the bottom line. And it's hard for people to hear because we're supposed to be an inclusive society. But being inclusive does not mean being inclusive of the rejection of our social contract. It does not mean being inclusive of the rejection of the agreed values. There are precious few things that we have managed to agree upon in this cultural mosaic that is Canada. There are precious few ideals and values that we have managed to agree upon. But those things need to be protected. And when people start to violate those things, they need to be called out. Because it is not Canadian, and it is not Albertan. And it is tragic that the premier of the province, who has historically in the past claimed to be an ally of a number of groups, not the least of which that's germane to this conversation, being the LGBTQ2S+ population. It's tragic that she couldn't say, we've got this thing called the Charter, folks. You're allowed to not like other people's beliefs, but you're not allowed to take those beliefs away. I would never say to David Parker or Mr. Mora, you shouldn't practice your faith. I would never say that. All I would say is you can't force your faith on other people. And in public institutions like the education system, you have no business trying to do that there. And that brings us to our other main event before we open it up for the open mic. Because Danielle Smith, she went ahead, she dropped her bomb. She said she was not going to do it, and then she did it anyways. We're talking about the pensions now. So, the pensions conversation, it's a big one. That was the press conference that we were talking about on Thursday, where Danielle Smith said, "I know some words. I'll try to mash them together and see if maybe that gets me out of this taking a position, showing some leadership, heaven forbid, on this hate march. These people who are yelling these hateful things at their kids. It's really complicated because I went to one of their wedding." That whole press conference was to announce the release of a report that may have been written by an organization called Life Works. We'll get into that in a second. But she announced the report, and then she gave a glowing version of the report. Rather than let Smith play it, we're going to let one of the government manufactured and paid for advertisements explain Danielle Smith's position.
Alberta's government is exploring a new possibility, an Alberta Pension Plan, or APP for short. You might be wondering, what's in it for you? You see, in 2020, Alberta's government commissioned LifeWorks, an independent third-party consultant, to review the potential for an Alberta pension plan. Their analysis found many benefits for Albertans. That's because Alberta's young working population and more jobs with higher wages has resulted in Albertans over-contributing tens of billions into the CPP compared to the benefits we've received. This means that Albertans could save over $5 billion in just the first year if we moved from the CPP to an Alberta pension plan. These savings could increase each senior's monthly pension payment, or even provide a large bonus payment for seniors at retirement. Or these savings could be used to save Alberta workers up to $1,425 in payroll deductions every year. And if you're a business owner, small, medium, or large, an APP could reduce the premiums you pay each year by up to $1,425 per employee. Along with more money in your pocket, an APP would be more stable than the current CPP. An asset transfer of over $300 billion from the CPP to an APP would mean a more secure pension for Albertans. And agreements would be developed to allow Albertans to move throughout Canada without impacting their pension benefits. To be clear, there will be no move to an Alberta pension plan unless Albertans approve it in a referendum. It's your pension, your choice. So learn more and have your say at albertapensionplan.ca.
You just see the marketing folks that got together in the room and they're like, okay, we're going to completely disrupt not only the province, but the rest of the country. What's going to be the most appetizing way for us to do that? I know. Let's get a woman with a soft voice to say it and put some nice folksy acoustic guitar music, a little bit of electric guitar solo, but nothing overstated. Keep it clean. And then we'll spew out all of the claims that this report potentially could have made. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the word could there, because if you go back and you listen to that train wreck, you'll hear very clearly the overuse of words like could or are or possibly. Speculative words, not truly based in reality or fact, because if we had actual reality or fact, then we might run into some problems. We'll talk about some of those problems in a little bit. But one of the first things a lot of people said was, whoa, pump the brakes. This came up during the election, and you said, I swore I heard you say that you weren't gonna do anything about this. You didn't campaign on this. It was one of the first questions that came up at the press conference.
You're announcing a proposed Alberta parental pension right now, but you did not campaign on one during the election. Why did you not campaign on the issue during the election?
I campaigned on releasing the report. We knew that we needed to get the updated numbers. The original report had been completed in 2021. With the passage of time, we had asked for an update. LifeMark told us they wouldn't be able to get it to us till May. I think we ultimately ended up getting it in June or July. And so it was a timing issue. But I made very clear anytime I was asked about it that I believed that this report needed to be released. Albertans needed to see the numbers for themselves. And if there was a decision at all to move forward on it, it would be done by referendum. I did campaign on it.
She did campaign on that. She says right there, you know what? I never said that we weren't going to do anything other than talk about the report. None of my MLAs or anybody said that this was a dead issue. I don't know why you would think that. And yet again, this is where I'd love to know how I send the Twitter account at Disordered YYC a fancy cup of coffee, because they showed up, whoever they are, they showed up with the receipts. And as much as Danielle Smith wants to say, "Oh no, I said I would campaign. I campaigned on releasing the report. That's what I did." That's not what Smith or two of her MLAs had to say.
I want to talk about the rest of Canada for a moment, who might see you with your Sovereignty Act, the prospect, the door still being open to pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan, and worry that a Smith government would be bad for national unity. Would those folks be wrong?
Look, no one is touching anybody's pension. Pension belongs to pensioners. It belongs to Albertans, and no one is going to be touching their pension. That's another example of the misinformation that the NDP keeps spreading because they don't want to talk about their record.
So this next question starts with RJ. Will you and your party commit to protecting pensions within the CPP and not forcing seniors to join an Alberta pension plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
This next question is directed for Chelsea. Diane Bell asks, if the UCP is elected, do they plan on replacing CPP with a provincial plan? Many of us seniors who rely on our CPP payments as part of our monthly income have concerns about the possible change and would like confirmation that this will not happen.
Thank you for the question. So no, that is not a topic of conversation anymore within the Conservative government.
It's not going to happen, said RJ Sigurdsson, said the new MLA for Livingston McLeod. Not going to happen. No, it's not a thing. RJ Sigurdsson, absolutely not. He will stand against any move to an Alberta provincial pension. Absolutely. Absolutely seems like one of those words that's kind of absolute. But let's just go back and listen to what Smith had to say when she was asked her question, because there's a little bit more, let's go with fleshing out, that needs to be done.
I want to talk about the rest of Canada for a moment, who might see you with your Sovereignty Act, the prospect, the door still being open to pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan, and worry that a Smith government would be bad for national unity. Would those folks be wrong?
Look, no one is touching anybody's pension. Pension belongs to pensioners. It belongs to Albertans, and no one is going to be touching their pension. That's another example of the misinformation that the NDP keeps spreading because they don't want to talk about their record.
To Canada, what would you say? Don't worry, Canada. Nobody's going to mess with your pension. Nobody's going to do anything like that. What did Smith have to say to Canada on Thursday?
I understand that there is the question for Albertans that we have to decide is it fair for our seniors and our workers and our employers to continue subsidizing the rest of Canada?
Oh, Canada, we're just so tired of subsidizing you. It's a really awkward lyric, but that's apparently what the Smith position is. All of a sudden now, she's gone from, no, don't worry about it, guys. We got it under control. Nobody's going to touch your pensions. It's not going to be any mess with the pensions, to, hey, we're tired of subsidizing you. Now, it's worth noting that the claims that the pension makes about how much money would be saved and what could be done with the money, we could give a big bonus payment to seniors. We could decrease the cost of the pension contributions. We could increase the amount that people get in pension contributions. We could figure out how to genetically engineer a unicorn. We could do that. There's lots of things we could do. But it's all predicated on one basic assumption. And that's what the amount is going to be. What's the amount that Alberta would be able to demand from the rest of Canada if we were to invoke this kind of thing? Should we worry about the details? Danielle Smith's answer is really quite something to behold.
But Premier, don't you need all of that locked down before you have a referendum to decide whether you're going to proceed with this? Because it feels like the fine print. You know, I'm thinking about my retirement, and the fine print really matters. Don't you need all of that fine print there for Albertans to see?
No, I think that because the amount of asset transfer is so significant, $334 billion, it amounts to about 28 times the amount of assets that you need to fund the liability that we have. Compared to right now, I think the CPP fund is about 8 times its the asset value. And so it would actually be more stable. It'd be a large enough fund that we'd be able to compete internationally with the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world to be able to get the best.
Now, maybe it's me, but there's two things in that video that are really worth paying attention to. The first one is the claim that Alberta would be able to walk with $334 billion, which, as people have pointed out, is more than half of the current assets, the current value that exists in the Canada Pension Plan. The notion that Canada or Alberta, sorry, would just be able to say, hey, rest of Canada, we're taking more than half of the money that the entire country has saved up. Hope you're cool with that and get away with it is laughable for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it's very, very clear in the legislation, as much as Danielle Smith likes to say, you know what, there's a pathway. What she doesn't include is that pathway in the legislation. It's very clearly stated that in order for any amendments to be made to either the Pension Act or the other affiliated act, any amendments, any changes, those amendments have to be agreed upon by 2/3 of the provinces of Canada, representing 2/3 of the population of Canada. So you can't just get all the really small provinces together to say, hey, we'll let you walk with over half of the money in the bank. You have to have 2/3 of the population of Canada represented as well. And the odds of getting 2/3 of the population of Canada to let Alberta walk with half of the money that's saved up for pensioners are pretty slim. Extraordinarily slim. Non-existent even. So the reality as to how this whole thing would unfold is extraordinarily up for question. Because there are legal challenges, and the interpretation that this report's authors have provided has been heavily criticized by experts, legal scholars, seniors, advocacy groups, economists. Trevor Tombe wrote a whole paper on how inaccurate it seemed Danielle Smith's claims were. But if we really want to know how much Alberta should be able to walk away with, let's assume for a second that there was somebody who maybe just a couple of years ago maybe had weighed in on this issue, and maybe they brought to the table a number that we could maybe refer to have an idea of how out of touch is the claim of $334 billion. If only we could ask that person.
I personally look at this as the first step towards an Alberta pension plan. He's trying to get the expertise and the money aside so that when he makes the pitch for the $40 billion transfer from the Canada Pension.
What's that, Danielle? $40 billion? Well, that seems like $300 billion shy of what you were talking about just a moment ago. That video was from very early on in Jason Kenney's tenure when he announced the Fair Deal panel, and Danielle Smith was acting as an analyst, as a pundit. And in fact, at the same time, the UCP put out that $40 million number as well. But now somehow, a short 4 years later, Alberta apparently invested another $300 billion, a third of $1 trillion into the pension plan, and we'd like our money back now. But that's not even the most disturbing part of the clip. I'm going to play the clip again because there's something that is really wild that's going on here.
Premier, don't you need all of that locked down before you have a referendum to decide whether you're going to proceed with this? Because it feels like the fine print. You know, I'm thinking about my retirement, and the fine print really matters. Don't you need all of that fine print there for Albertans to see?
No, I think that because the amount of asset transfer is so significant, $334 billion, it amounts to about 28 times the amount of assets that you need to fund the liability that we have. Compared to right now, I think the CPP fund is about 8 times its the asset value. And so it would actually be more stable. It'd be a large enough fund that we'd be able to compete internationally with the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world to be able to get the best.
That's Danielle Smith making the argument that the details don't matter because of the amount of money that's involved. We've got some wiggle room here, is effectively the argument that she's making. When she's asking Albertans to trust her judgment, to trust her ability to manage all of the details, to make sure that however this fund was to be set up, all of the things that could potentially screw over a senior's retirement would be taken care of. And her response is not, we're going to get those details figured out and then we'll have the referendum. Her response is, we're going to walk with so much money, it doesn't even matter. Which is absolutely wild, especially when you consider multiple times this week, Danielle Smith couldn't even get the authors of the report right.
In 2020, Alberta's government commissioned LifeWorks, an independent third-party expert consultant. We hired LifeMark, which incidentally was formerly Morneau Chappelle. With the passage of time, we had asked for an update. LifeMark told us they wouldn't be able to get it to us till May.
We did get an estimate from LifeMark about what it would.
To be clear, the report is from LifeWork. It's not LifeMark. One would think if you were trying to pitch to Albertans and, by extension, the rest of Canada to let it happen, that you should be trusted with the details of managing anywhere between $40 billion to $334 billion, I guess, that you would be able to at least manage getting the name of the people who told you it was possible right. But even that, on multiple occasions, because that audio that you heard is not just Danielle Smith at the press conference, it's also her appearing on national television, getting the name wrong. It's not a super compelling argument. Hey, you should totally trust us with all of this money because we can't remember the names of the people who told us that we were going to be able to get this much money in the first place. And that brings us to the last little bit, last two bits that we got to talk about. We're going to do the survey first. So the first thing is, one of the things that the provincial government, again, the provincial government funded by taxpayers. So you're paying for all of this. If you're listening to the province of Alberta and you pay taxes of any kind, you're paying for these ads. You're paying for the survey. The province released a survey. Hey, we got a bunch of questions we're going to ask you about the things and the stuff and what you think about the pension. And you would think, given that the core of this conversation is, should Alberta move out of the Canadian pension plan, or should we go our own road with an indeterminate amount of money and maybe a company LifeWork, who knows? It doesn't really matter, does it? You'd think that would be the main question. Do you think we should do this very big thing? But in fact, the whole survey is predicated on the assumption, hey, we're going to do this thing. There's a boatload of questions, and you're absolutely right. It's a complete mess. We made the graphic this way on purpose because every single question is, how would you like to see this money used? How do you think the money should be used? What of these things is the most important for you? Do you think we should give the seniors the more money, or should we decrease the premiums, or should we maybe do both? What should we do? Nowhere in there is the question, should we do it? There's a couple of text boxes that are available where you can say, please don't do this. But those text boxes, except for the final one, are responses to questions of, what do you think the priority of these things should be? So as much as we're seeing people who are filling out the survey and using all of the text boxes to say, oh, I think this might be some bullshit right here. I don't want you to leave the CPP. I don't want to leave the CPP. The only one that they couldn't arguably invalidate, because it wasn't an answer to the question that they asked, is the last one, where they ask, do you have any final thoughts to share with the panel regarding an Alberta pension plan? All of the other answer boxes, You can fill in answers and you can hope that somebody reads them. But as we've seen with similar surveys from the UCP government, if they get an answer to a question that is not relevant to the question that was asked, they will consider it an invalid answer and dismiss it. Which really means the only available way to make your voice heard on this issue is to either write your MLA and probably CC in the other party. If you're in a UCP constituency, write your UCP MLA and CC the critic on the NDP side and vice versa. Or show up at one of the town halls to be announced and make your voice heard there. Because this survey is an exercise in predetermined outcomes. And as we've seen from the UCP over and over and over again, when they have a predetermined outcome in mind, cough, closing the Lethbridge supervised consumption site, cough, they will go to any length to do that. One other little thing that we wanted to touch on before we have a little bit of a conversation. Sarah Biggs has offered to join us again tonight, so we're going to bring her in for a little bit before we go to our open mic. But after we have a little bit of a chat with Sarah, we're going to open it up to the rest of the floor. If you're one of our listeners on the Twitter Spaces or the X Spaces, I'm trying to change and grow. If you're one of the listeners on Spaces, then all you have to do is tap the little microphone. We'll bring you in. You can share your thoughts. You can tell me what I got wrong. You can tell me, I don't know, what your thoughts are on going with an Alberta pension plan, if that's what you want to do. But there's one other thing we got to touch on real quick. There's been a bunch of people on the social medias. Social media is always right. Especially when it comes to pundits. Oh, pundits get it right all the time. There's been a lot of people talking about, oh, hey, Danielle Smith, she's basically said between the survey where there's all these predetermined outcomes, and then we've got the press conference, it seems like there's pretty much guaranteed going to be a referendum. Now, for anybody who's curious, that referendum, a couple of UCP MLAs have already alluded, would be going on during the municipal elections in 2025, just to make things that much more contentious. They'll include the referendum question in the municipal elections, in all likelihood, if it comes to a referendum, which it probably will. But to be clear, they have not announced that there's going to be a referendum. What the UCP have said, what the government has said, is that we're doing a consultation period to determine if there's going to be a referendum. And that enables them to spend all of your money on advertising. There's a few people who have chucked around this picture on social media, and they've said, hey, I don't know. It seems like, if you take a look at the referendum question, during the referendum period, a department or provincial corporation shall not advertise or publish any information about its programs or activities related to the subject matter of the referendum that has a disproportionate impact on voters in the areas of Alberta in which the referendum is being held, unless the advertisement or publication, then it gives some there's some legitimate excuses for why the government might have to advertise. But the spirit of it is, hey, government, if you're going to hold a referendum, you can't advertise. You can't use taxpayers' money to influence the outcome. And as we very clearly saw in that one advertisement, of which there are many already, if anybody who's curious, you can go over to Your Government of Alberta Facebook page and take a look at the many advertising programs that they're currently running, paying for with your dollars. And those are just the ones that are running on Facebook. That's not including the print. That's not including the radio. That's not including the television. That's not included the YouTubes and all of that. It's not including any of those things. A lot of money being spent. It would be nice to think, oh, we can catch the government. Oh, they're doing a thing. They're spending our money during a referendum period. But as a good friend of the show, Mr. Miles Chikirda, pointed out, you got to take a look on what the definitions of the terms are. Sometimes it's good to have a pedant kicking around. Referendum period. In the case of a referendum under the Referendum Act, ordered to be held in conjunction with the general election under this act, or as a standalone referendum on a date provided in the order, the period commencing when the order is issued and ending at the end of the date set for voting, and in the case of a referendum under the Referendum Act to be held in conjunction with the general election under the Local Authorities Act, the period commencing on the later of the date of which the order is issued or 60 days before the election day and ending at the end of election day. So until Danielle Smith and UCP say, hey, you know what? We listen, maybe, and we've decided that we're definitely going to have a referendum and we're issuing the order on this day. Until they do that, we're not in the referendum period, which means they can spend as much of your taxpayer dollars as they want to convince you and your friends and your neighbors that, gosh, we could do all of these amazing things with this fictional amount of money that has been debunked by almost everybody except for Daniel Smith and the UCP. They really like that $334 billion. It's a big number. So big, you don't even have to worry about the details. Who couldn't love that? They can just keep spending and spending and spending. By the way, the most likely time, like we said, 2025, you've got like a year and a half of sitting through advertising for why the Alberta pension plan would be the best thing ever. They're going to absolutely flood the zone with advertising on this issue. This is going to be such a huge strategic part of how the fight with Ottawa, those Eastern bastards, how that's going to be framed. But to get a little bit of context on the response, not only to the hate marches, but also to the pension plan, we're going to bring in senior Politico and friend of the show, none other than Sarah Biggs. Sarah, how are you doing tonight?
Senior, thank you.
Well, because we're talking about pensions, so I made it relevant by saying senior. You're not that old, though.
I just wanted to read you guys middle-aged-ish.
Yeah, those middle-aged people, they're the worst.
Okay, so, sorry, my office sounds empty because it is, because my real estate agent decided that we were taking everything away, so please pardon me. By the way, my house did not get rented.
Oh. I was going to ask if you were in a new undisclosed location because somebody rented your house out from underneath you.
No. I lost a bid today on a house, so I'm all sad.
Oh, that's not fun. You were going to read a thing. What are you going to read?
Yeah. So on October 30th, 1995, there was a little thing in Quebec that happened that was called the referendum for independence. So we need to talk about vague questions. So the question was, because I'm being brought a glass of water by my child. Thank you.
You got staff?
I got staff. Okay, so it was asking, do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign after having made a formal offer to Canada for a new economic and political partnership with the scope of the bill respecting the future of Quebec and the agreement signed on June 12, 1995?
I hope.
How's that for a question?
Well, I mean, here's my immediate concern. I feel like if you're asking that question in Quebec, it should be in French.
Well, yeah, but we're in Alberta and everybody speaks English, so I took the English version.
I'm told I know of at least one person in this province who speaks French.
No. Okay, so just to show the importance of the vote, the no won at 50.58%. The yes lost at 49.42%. That was 60,000 votes that have made the decision between an independent Quebec and a Quebec that remains in confederation. But the question was so vague. And I remember there was a whole debate about how vague the question was because nobody knew what the agreement was signed on June 12, 1995, because there was no internet, there wasn't 10 o'clock news. There was a lot of things happening back in 1995. So I remember Jean Chrétien just sending a ton of Anglophones in Montreal say, no, we love you, Quebec, stay with us, please. It was phenomenal. I still remember that day. So, buyers beware. You know what I would do, Nate? If I was someone opposing that Alberta pension plan, I would make big signs in Ontario and be like, hey, Ontario, you okay with that? Are you really okay with that?
Yeah, Alberta's calling.
9.9 Alberta's calling, and we want our money. And they're taking the house and the pension plan and the backyard and the 3 luxury cars. That's what they want to do. But we need, so obviously I'm opposed to it because they want to go with LifeWorks or whatever the fuck they call it.
LifeWorks, like Mark,
That's how I know them.
Line.
Lifeline. What happens if they go under? Where does the money go? Any guarantees? We need to know that. That's very important.
No, there's enough money. There's enough money. You don't need to worry about those details. It's $34 billion. You don't need to worry about the details.
Yeah, and there's like the false comparisons that they're comparing the Alberta teacher. So people are like, yeah, but teacher plan is administered privately, and you guys were administered privately before. So is Ontario teachers pension plan. Why? Because they were in London trying to invest in new companies in England. And each province has a way to deal with their professional funds, like the retirement plan for the employees at the assembly. They have a pension plan. When ministers it. When I was working for a Crown Corporation, we had another Crown Corporation administrating our pension. So I got so many questions, Nate. So as the Premier-in-Chief, Mr. Parker said, we're going to be voting, confirmed it on Twitter today, we're going to be voting in the next municipal election, 2025. Let's remember a few things. I'm hearing noise that he will get involved on the municipal level. He's going to go after school boards. And he's going to mobilize as much as he can for the referendum. So the polarization is bad now. Just wait 6 months and it's going to get beyond disgusting. Like, now is the time to lobby the provinces to say, because there's also that thing that's called the Confederation Act. It's complicated. We're a family. It's like a prenup, right? If you want to take some things away, the other provinces need to agree with it. Like seriously, we have a premier this week that said, well, too bad, so sad, Eastern Canada. You're going to have to pay more to get less.
But this is the thing that I don't that I struggle with is like, we've already seen this government, largely the same members of this government, different premier, but the same thing, say, you know what we're going to do? Oh, we're going to have us a referendum and that'll show them. And then we had a referendum on equalization and nothing changed. So because the reality is that it's not as simple as simply having a referendum. There's a whole process, legal challenges.
It's got to go through the House, it's got to go through the Senate, and it's got to get royal assent. It's extremely complicated. Because remember, in the 80s, Pierre-Elliott Trudeau brought the Queen here to sign a big piece of paper. Well, being a province means that we need to uphold to everything that's being said in that piece of paper. I got that in the road somewhere. It's fine. It's office decoration. But also, the current government has not been elected with a mandate to move to an Alberta pension plan. They have not campaigned, and I'm sure you talked about it, but they have not been elected on the premises that an exploration for an Alberta pension plan would happen.
Well, they were
So
elected on the opposite. Like we played a clip
exactly.
earlier where
Oh, yeah,
R.J.
yeah,
Sigurdson and Danielle Smith and
yeah.
one of
Yeah,
the MLAs who was standing behind her got elected, as well as the new MLA for Livingston Lacombe, Chelsea Petrovic, all said there's
yeah.
absolutely no way that we're going to pursue a Alberta pension plan.
No, but when I was
So
talking to people in the background, they were like, "Oh, it's got to be awesome." I was like, "You guys can't do that. You can't just sneak it in." And they're like,
But this is the thing. This is the problem, and this is where I find some of the commentary. And you and I had a little bit of an offline conversation about this
"Oh,
yesterday,
yeah, 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 yeah." And
where some of the
I
commentary
admit,
from some of the pundits that we're used to being able to rely on. I'm not going to name names because I'm not that guy, but some of the pundits that people used to feel like they could rely on because they historically understood how things worked have come out and said, for example, we talked about the whole advertising during the referendum period. There were people who
yeah,
said, "Oh, you know what? We're pretty much in the referendum period. They're breaking the law." And the problem is, we're dealing with a government that is not acting in good faith. We see that
no,
by nature of the fact that they have even allowed this conversation to get to where it is. And so, if you don't start with, to me, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but if we don't start with the assumption the norms don't exist. The rules, the good faith rules that people used to at least pretend to play by no longer exist. We have a government that will straight up lie to people. Daniel Smith trying to say I campaigned on releasing the report, but now we're going to do this whole consultation thing. And by the way, I think it's the best idea ever. I'm fully behind it. I love these numbers. Damn the details. That is not behavior that we would have historically seen from any government that was acting in good faith. And as much as you can criticize the NDP, and I do, and I'm probably going to in another couple of minutes here, as much as you can criticize the NDP for bringing in legislation that maybe lacked consultation, they didn't do anything during their 4-year period that they didn't say that they were going to do.
no, they were, and we're going to give that to the NDP. They're not campaigning with hidden intentions, right? They're they've always, they could have said nothing about the corporate income tax, and they could have gone back in the year and be like, "Hey guys, you know what? We're a little tight. We're gonna have to increase corporate taxes by 0.5%." They could have done that, but they decided to go forward. Did I agree with the policy? 100% no. But were they honest about it? Yes, they were. So we're gonna give them that. The thing that we're gonna be facing is that the people that are behind. So it's funny because when they announced that, and I sent you the email when they announced the pension plan, I got right away an email from the Alberta Prosperity Project that was quite very in detail, let me tell you that. And then we're seeing comments like, "Let those bastards freeze in the cold." And we know that someone is very much so enjoying his access to the Premier's office. We all know that. He loves it. He's acting like it's no big deal, but don't be fooled. Fool me once, fool me twice. No. Like, the guy has direct access to the
But
highest office.
Here's where I want to pivot a little bit because you said the NDP didn't do anything they didn't campaign on. I mean, today we saw some tepid messaging from a few of the NDP regulars, but I want to talk about the NDP response to not just the pensions, but to the hate marches. So we'll do the hate marches first because I can get really fired up over that. Here's my thing. I went through the social media for a couple of NDP MLAs who, let's go with, have a little bit of a vested interest in some of the demographics that we're talking about here. I'm not going to name names again because I already brought the cancel clock out once tonight. But, it would seem to me that if you have somebody like David Parker, and I hate that I have to say this next part because I'm not a fan of my MLA. I have an NDP MLA. I do not like him. But at least he put out a fairly strong worded statement in a series of tweets. But there's a couple of MLAs who I would think would be in an excellent position to address Mr. Parker's assertion that the Muslims, like there's some sort of monolith, are with him, and that the Sikhs, like there's some sort of monolith. I mean, just because you have one Muslim guy show up at your thing, or 2 or 10, does not mean that is in any way representative of all adherents of the Muslim faith. We heard when this conversation came up before, Ziad, he made a very, very clear condemnation of the language and the behavior that we saw from some of the people in the previous protests. So you don't get to claim the Muslims, like there's some kind of monolith, are with you. But here's my problem. I'm not in a position of leadership in this province. As many people will tell you, I'm a hack podcaster. I'm okay with that. I get to make jokes.
Yeah, you're a hack.
That's true. But there are people with the NDP who are part of those groups or those faiths who are in an excellent position to say, hey, David Parker, I'm not with you.
Sit down.
There's lots of people who are in the position to say that. And I have not seen that statement from any of them. I've seen some tepid retweets of Janice Irwin, and I mean, good for Janice Irwin for stepping up, and Rocky Pacioli as well for stepping up and making it very, very clear where they stood. But this, to me, if you're going to campaign as the party of inclusivity and the party that supports the LGBTQ2S plus youth, this is maybe an opportunity to stand up and not just be quiet. Why is it, do you think, that we're seeing members of those groups who are part of the NDP caucus, who campaign to put themselves in positions of leadership? And I am by no means saying that they should say, oh, you know what? I believe X, Y, Z, and that's different. I mean, you can, if somebody wants to believe, I disagree with it, to be clear. But if somebody, because of their faith, wants to say, I don't believe in anything other than cisgendered straight people, that's, to my eyes, ignorant, but you have the right to believe that. But when you're going to put yourself in a position of leadership and you're going to say that you're going to defend the charter, then you've got to fucking defend the charter. And if you choose to be quiet, then you are failing in the job that you chose to do. Am I wrong?
No.
Then where the hell are they?
Because I need to put this in a very diplomatic way.
I warned you.
It's fine. We're in such divided times, and TBA is using part of the Muslim community, as we talked before, as a lightning rod to further their cause. We have seen Parker attempting to, frame the anti-protesters as racist. We have seen that this week.
Sure.
But I live in a riding where my MLA was not there, didn't answer the calls, didn't show up.
Here's what my question is.
It's fucking bothering me. Okay?
I'm going to rephrase my question. I'm going to make it a little bit more diplomatic for you. I believe, personally, based on my experience with other people, I believe that there are more Muslims and Sikhs in Alberta and in Canada who subscribe to the charter and who recognize that they are entirely entitled, and in fact, their faith is protected under the charter. But they have no interest in targeting vulnerable kids. I believe that that's the majority of the groups that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's. I think it's insane to say that all Muslims believe these things or that all Sikhs believe these things. And it's gross. And I don't understand why the people who are in elected positions of leadership, who are representatives of their constituents, who are representatives of their party and who are supposed to be defending the charter are, for all intents and purposes, silent.
Okay, let's put it that way. When you have the privilege of being elected representing constituents and to have the privilege to sit in the legislature and fight for what is right, you need to fucking show up. That's it. You need to show up. If you are associating yourself with a party that is extremely clear about inclusion, diversity, support to LGBTQIA+, and everything in between, you need to fucking show up. Showing up should not be a thing of convenience.
So
Let's
here's my
put it
next
that
question
way.
then, because from a public affairs communications perspective, I find myself looking at somebody like I don't know, Mickey Amory, who has appeared in multiple photos with the organizer of these protests. I would think, given his role as justice minister,
Yep.
that
we would have
if
seen a statement sooner than never.
well, here's my question: if Mickey Amory believed that what Mahmoud is saying is wrong and is not representative of his faith and is not representative of what Mr. Amory believes, given the fact that he's campaigned with him for 2 elections in a row, why is it that Mickey Amory is silent? Why is it that members, because I don't want to just go after the NDP. I mean, I expect more from the NDP on these issues, but it's also worth noting there's a lot of folks in the UCP in the caucus who are in ministries who are sick or who are Muslim, and we haven't heard anything from them.
No, so they're scared.
But this, my greater point that I'm getting to before I let you jump in, my greater point that I'm getting to is if the argument is that your faith supersedes government, if the argument is that your faith supersedes the societal norms that are established in the charter, for members of those faiths who are in those elected roles to stay silent can only be, to my eyes, interpreted as an endorsement of those views. And I want to be very, very clear. I am not by any stretch of the imagination saying these are views that are held by all Muslims or these are views that are held by all Sikhs. But for people who have campaigned on their faith, for people who have made their faith part of their public identity, for them to not differentiate themselves from people who are this close to the premier's office, when in theory their faith should rise above everything else. If we buy the arguments that Parker and Mahmoud are putting forward, they should have no problem saying, I will defend my faith against these hateful views, even if Danny gets a little pissed at me.
Well, it's funny. Somebody asked me to go to church with them this morning, so I obliged. I went to church this morning. I haven't walked in church in 20 years. 20 years. And they were saying, the prayers and all that. And they were like, and we are committed to defend all life, no matter who they are, from conception to death. Okay, from conception. Like, I'm the one who got Bill 17 passed. Like, I didn't get that one. I didn't, I got to skip a few lines this morning. But, at the end of the day, the religion, what's fascinating, let me tell you this. They're not saying that they have the Jewish community supporting them.
I mean, you're not wrong.
The Jewish community, and I live in the area that's, quite predominantly Jewish, they are accepting, they are loving. There are even Orthodox synagogues that are accepting trans people. Let's say you're female to male, they will let you sit on the male side because some synagogues are segregating women and men. we have not seen that community involved on the wrong side. But if you're saying you're a Catholic, you shouldn't be the shit you're doing right now. If you're a Catholic, I'm gonna go after Parker because that's, if you're a Catholic, you should not be supporting people putting hateful messages in children's mouth. If you are a Catholic and a patriotic person, you know the value on the flag and you do not encourage kids to step on them. If you are a Catholic, you better go to confession on Friday because he's got a lot to deal with Jesus.
Here's why I want to see the condemnation.
Yep. But okay, hold on. Mickey Amory, as Minister of Justice, is not positioning himself right now in a good spot because he is the ultimate Attorney General and Minister of Justice that if that shit goes too far, it will be coming from his office, from the Crown prosecutors to prosecute the individuals that are going too far. So then there will be a real conflict of interest and a real ethical problem because the Minister of Justice did not come out against those. We heard this week, well, there's good people on both sides. I'm sorry, but a kid is 7 years old saying disgusting things is not being raised by good humans. I'm sorry. But the Minister of Justice shouldn't come out right away and say, we do not endorse this. But by their silence and their standby, they are fully endorsing what by default, even if they don't agree with it. But their silence made them endorse by default what happened this week.
Here's my thing.
Give me your twist.
This is why the condemnation is so important to me. We saw in Kitchener the day after these protests, these hate rallies, we saw in Kitchener a group of kids got their hands on a pride flag. They took it to school. They lit it on fire. And then they threw it at kids who identify as LGBTQ2S+. But they didn't just stop by throwing the remnants of a burnt pride flag at them. They threw rocks at them. This is no different to me than the kids who are showing up at these protests that their parents very clearly brought them to, who are saying into the microphone absolutely hateful things and who are holding up appalling signs saying to get rid of, move all of the gays, kick all of the gays out of the country.
Out of the country. Out of our... Don't...
These are kids who are not learning. As much as David Parker likes to say, oh, it's the curriculum, as much as Mahmoud likes to say, oh, it's the curriculum, it is absolutely not the curriculum because there is nowhere in the curriculum that these kids are being taught this. And when people in positions of leadership fail to speak out against this stuff, not only does it embolden the parents, but it absolutely emboldens the kids because they don't see anything wrong with what they're doing because nobody's is telling them there's something wrong with what they're doing. It's unacceptable. And this is why I'm so angry at the leadership on all levels of this government and the opposition. Because the response at best has been tepid. The response from the premier was a complete, as far as I'm concerned, it was a complete abdication from what her responsibilities are.
Because they're going to be bringing the conversation the next few weeks because it's going to be a hot topic in caucus. But we saw today in Ponoka, a bakery was asked to remove their pride flag. Yeah, it's happening again in Ponoka. Ponoka, I don't know what's in the water, but you got issues. And you elect somebody and says horrible things. You know, I know a lot of I can't even night. Like, we're at the point where we're gonna have to, I don't even know what to do anymore. Like, America is spilling, and Alberta very often is the connect right in the mind. And mark my words, this battle would be the convoy 2.0. They are not, because they're bringing fuck Trudeau flags, they're bringing everything 5G, put aluminum on your 3 sheets of aluminum on your walls at home, because on October 4th, they're going to be blasting with 5G. Those very same people are showing up at those protests as well. But we're going to be seeing, it's going to be Convoy 2.0 here. I said it. I'm sorry. I have to say
Well,
it.
here's what my thing is. I think that areas of the country have demonstrated how you respond to this. And I take a look at, or like what we saw in Winnipeg today, where there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people who showed up to show support for the LGBTQ2S+ youth. I think it's a combination of things. I think we have to continue educating kids out of, because here's the thing, and I go back to this again, and nobody likes to hear this. Nobody likes to have this conversation. But the bottom line is there are shitty parents out there. There are, and they teach hate. That's just reality. And either we can try to intercede and say, hey, you know what? And again, I'm not talking about if you want to believe what you want to believe. I don't care about that. But as soon as you start walking around targeting vulnerable groups and saying that they should be shipped out of the country, you are now trying to take your faith and impose it on other people. And that's not okay.
But they are claiming that they are the majority when they are the minority. But again, why has he been so successful at organizing last year? Why hasn't he been so successful organizing for the leadership? Why has he been so successful kicking out Kenny? It's because they organize and we do not. And I'm going to repeat this. Voting matters, showing up matters, being loud matters. Like this week, I lost my proverbial mind on Twitter and I was not careful, and I don't care about it because it's fucking garbage. And that's what it is. Some people were complaining that their kids had a story time at school. And well, it was a story about a kid and his 2 mommies. So fucking what? Deal with it. It's called fucking life. I do not want to go back into a pattern that is flirting with goddamn fascism, and that we're going to be put in such a precarious position that something extremely bad will happen. Because someone's going to get hurt, and they will be.
Somebody has. Somebody has. Somebody lit a pride flag on fire, threw it at kids, and then threw rocks at them. Somebody has been hurt. I did a show a couple of months ago where I said, this ends. The end point of this is not these fucking protests. The end point of this is some kid getting tied to a stake and getting lit on fire. And when we have kids lighting pride flags on fire and throwing them at other kids and throwing rocks at other kids, we are a hair's breadth away from that. And when people like David Parker and Mahmoud sit up there and fuel this fire with these bullshit rallies, and our leaders fail to stand up and condemn it full-throatedly, that's the end point. And it's not the end point because it'll keep going from there.
So if I was the NDP, let's talk strategy for a second to try to, I'm going to let you.
I want to bring Ziad in a second. We have a couple of other people that have tapped in here, so I'm going to give you about a minute.
Sorry if I'm super calm about it, but I've been dealing with a lot of shit this week, and I'm trying to keep a rational brain on how we can deal with that. So if I was the NDP, House is reconvening in 1 month. The first bill that I would present, if I was the NDP, is asking the Premier to condemn those protests, those hate messages, and hold her accountable in the legislature. And then you're gonna have to go, let's go with this Emily, let's go with this Emily, let's go with this Emily, and get them. We need to do that. But I feel your anger, but I even emailed my eldest kid's school to be like, hey, are you guys okay? Is there anything in front of the school? Because I can't fucking even. And they're walking with fucking like victory flags saying, we won, we're gonna get this. Let's keep going. But it's fueling. He needs to be stopped. He's in total delusion. He's holding some of
Smith is
the.
scared of him. We know that.
She is only in power because he's there. And then in November, the UCP board is going up for election. Get fucking spicy. People were asking me if I was going. Absolutely fucking not. I'm not gonna wait 5 more minutes to try to bring some reasonable people. I'm not wasting my fucking time. I can't fucking do it anymore because even the moderates have refused to grow a spine and stand up and say enough is enough. Where, again, like we were saying last year, where are the moderates in all of this? Where are the progressives, conservative, in that caucus? There's a very few left that I know that they would be standing against this, but are not taking a goddamn stance. But if I was the NDP, I'd write a bill or do a private member bill, a proclamation that these rallies are hateful, wrong, violent, and they need to stop. And the one instigating hate speech will be prosecuted. And then you get them one by one to see who's going to vote against this. And then you can start framing your narrative from there.
There you go. All right, I'm going to bring in Ziad.
Sorry.
No worries. I'm going to bring in Ziad. We haven't had Ziad on the show in a while. I'm sure he's super thrilled with the good news that Alberta is not going to be able to sell our Turkish Tylenol anywhere, and we're just going to watch it, I guess, decompose. But Ziad, what's going on tonight, my friend?
Thanks. I'm actually nice to talk to you again. I'm actually going to use that as an example on the pension discussion. But bravo to you and Sarah for having this fascism discussion as well, too. I just wanted to talk about this pension where Alberta has put in 16, or Albertans, not the government of Alberta, but individual Albertans, have put in 16% of the funds in the CPP, and LifeWorks and the Alberta government feel we deserve to pull out 53% of the funds there. So put in 16, take out 53%, that's 3.3 times your fair share. Now, look at the other side of the coin. So the rest of the CPP contributors have contributed 84% of the CPP, and all they're left with is 47%. So they're going to get 56 cents on the dollar back. So why is it that just because when you are contributing your payroll taxes towards Canada Pension Plan, which is a right of us as individuals, it's not a right of our governments, why is it that the Alberta addresses mailing in that payroll tax are getting 6 times as much out of the pension as the non-Alberta addresses? So, there's no way the Canada Pension Plan trustees are going to allow that. Their job is to ensure that the Canada Pension Plan is solvent. And where are they going to say that the people in Alberta have 6 times the right to the money as the people not in Alberta contributing to this plan where everybody makes the same contribution and it deserves the same benefits? Another part of this too is that the first step Alberta has to make is to establish a equivalent pension plan and then transfer the money there once the federal government has agreed that Alberta has created an equivalent pension plan. And that includes transferability across provinces. So let's go back to the acetaminophen from about a year ago. You would think this is something where other provinces would be happy to cooperate with Alberta. Alberta was willing to buy 5 million bottles, spending up to $80 million to help resolve all of these empty shelves across Canada. And it wasn't very clear what Copping and Smith were saying back then, whether they're selling to retail pharmacies or whether they're selling to other government healthcare organizations in other provinces. But apparently they were willing to make a big bulk buy through MH Care Medical Crony in Edmonton on the Atabey factory in Turkey and we're willing to absorb the cost to make the wholesale price equal in other provinces, even though Alberta was paying double or more the wholesale price. So despite all of that subsidy, you would think there'd be other provinces that would be happy to cooperate with Alberta, and the feds would be happy to cooperate in Alberta with Alberta government to get this acetamin into our country. And instead, Alberta stupidly wouldn't follow, the government of Alberta stupidly wouldn't follow the federal rules for acetaminophen, imported 500,000 bottles without any approval, ahead of any approval, and had to junk that for nearly $10 million. And then bought more bottles on the CMOH's assertion it was an emergency, and they're not being used anywhere, and no other province wants them. So if we look at, Danielle Smith's assertions that, I'll create not just an equivalent pension plan, which is a legal requirement, I'll create a better one. You'll either be making lower contributions or you'll have higher benefits. You'll even have lump sum benefits. That requires cooperation with the other provinces, not just to gut the CPP at the ratios I talked about, but in order to have this transferability across provinces. And on a simple thing where across Canada you're getting pictures of empty shelves without kids' acetaminophen on them, they can't even meet either the very simple federal rules or supply any other provincial health organization or any other pharmaceutical chain than London Drugs, who doesn't carry it anymore either. So, we're talking about $300 and something billion of pension funds. These guys can't even manage $80 million of acetaminophen.
Right? Like, what could go wrong? Yeah. I mean, there's so much wrong with this pension deal, and there's so much wrong with how, again, I just keep going back to Smith on Power and Politics saying we don't have to worry about the details because that's how much money we're going to get. To me, the more money that you have, the greater responsibility, the more taxpayers' money that you have, the greater responsibility you have to exercise. And to be like, oh no, because we've got so much money, we don't have to worry about any of those things that are going to define the future of that money. It'll be cool because there's just so much. She's Scrooge McDuck at this thing all the way. And I don't understand it.
Well, as soon as you come out saying that you deserve 53% out for putting 16% in, and everybody else gets half on the dollar, it's not even really worth other provincial premiers to comment. Because all you're doing is discrediting yourself right away. You're discrediting LifeWorks or Manor Chappelle or whoever they are. You're just showing that you're just there to fund cronies to have this province-wide consultation and to, put up the fancy website and do the bias surveys. And, I heard what Sarah was saying about the Clarity Act with maybe a referendum question will come after a lot of propaganda and misinformation of Albertans. But really all you're trying to do is just get Albertans mad at others in Canada in order to manipulate them for some reason. But the rest of the country is looking at this going, what, you think your dollars are worth 6 times everybody else's dollars?
Oh, it's a slap in the face to Canada. And that's the thing. That's the other thing that bothers me about this is that Smith is making it very, very clear that her primary allegiance is not to Canada. And I get that she's got a responsibility as premier of the province, but the premier of the province operates in that role within the greater body that is Canada. I mean, I don't have an Alberta tattoo, but I do have a maple leaf, and I'm a Canadian before I'm an Albertan all day, every day. And I was born here, which is not like, I was born here. It just means it's all I've ever known. So it's wild to me how quickly she's willing to just say, screw you, Canada.
It's very much an us versus them. And, same way Preston Manning's little tour or the witch hunt or the fossil fuel war room, it's sort of a handy consulting gig for cronies for a year or so and a way to poison Albertans' minds for a while. But really, what's the point? I mean, I just don't see the point of pissing off other Canadians saying, "Oh, we want to rip you off from your CPP at 6 times the value that you put in."
I hear you, man. Anything else that you want to add in there? It's good to hear your voice again, by the way.
Thanks. Good to be back. No, nothing to add. You guys continue on, and I'm sure you have other good guests to speak as well, too. Thank you.
Well, we've got the Alberta Accountability Alliance, so I'm going to bring them in next, and then we've got Cassandra, who is a regular caller speaker as well. But I don't think we've had the Alberta Accountability Alliance. I dig your graphic though for your Twitter profile. That's off to a good start. What's going on, Alliance? Al?
Yeah, Al. It's actually ADC. So co-founder of the alliance.
Okay.
So we've talked before, and we're actually behind the AB Poli. So you'll mention that later. I actually wrote down stuff this time, so we're not stumbling. I guess the first thing that we have to ask is, before we look at pensions or whatever, what happened to and where is the missing $657 million earmarked for COVID relief?
I mean, that's a good question.
Because we just had that money. I mean, it's been proven that it was sent by the feds. UCP can't tell anyone where it went, what it went for. We know they shut down the COVID relief fund for Albertans during the pandemic. So it's not like they used all the money. Where did that money go?
I'm sure it was spent in the most responsible of ways.
Of course.
They gave a $1.5 million contract for advertising recently, right?
Yeah. Second, with Parker, what people need to realize is Parker is the Steve Bannon of Alberta.
Yes.
And that's the danger of the fact that it doesn't matter who's in power. Like who is the puppet? Like Trump was the puppet for Bannon. That is the Republican playbook, which of course Smith being her hero is Ted Cruz, just playing right that whole playbook. So having Parker there as the Steve Bannon, that's the biggest, or that is the danger. Now, what frustrates the hell out of me and the rest of the small but mighty group here of the Alliance is the fact that we're fighting an uphill battle. With Take Back Alberta, it's not only Take Back Alberta that you're fighting. When you look at the registered political third-party advertisers or electoral third-party advertisers with Elections Alberta, which we had to do because when we did some stuff that was anti-Kenny or anti-Smith without being registered, the whole thing, Elections Alberta came after us. Anyway, there's a group of 6 different organizations that are all spewing the UCP message. So there's Alberta Pride, Alberta First Initiative, Priority Alberta, Western Unity Group, Stop the NDP, and finally Take Back Alberta. Because all these people are showing the same unity, they can come together. And for us, the frustration comes in where we want to work with the nurses union, we want to work with the doctors, we want to work with the Save Our Students, the Helping Hand, all these different groups. And we're offering that ability to come under the banner because we're registered, but everyone wants to do their own thing. And the only way we'll be able to effectively fight back, because regardless of what anyone thinks, the NDP as the opposition with no seats to compete against the majority is useless right now. They can say all they want to say in the ledge. They can go and put whatever bills through. None of them are going to get through because you've got the majority. I saw it when I was living in BC. You see it in Saskatchewan. With the majority, you don't even have to show up at the ledge. You can just do everything through Zoom and put it through.
So I'm going to disagree with you on that last statement. A very, very efficient opposition is really important. I'm going to give you an example. Last year with Bill 17, again, I'm going to repeat Bill 17 again because it was a very, very leftist position to take. So basically, what happened is that women, individuals facing grief with a loss of pregnancy, they were only given 3 days for a solely miscarriage and stillbirth. But then, with the opposition, we managed to get the minister on the record that abortion and TFMR would also be included in that. So I'm going to disagree with you on that one. I think that very often oppositions can be effective, especially if they have good, strong messaging. They need to work on their messaging. They're going to go through it. But also, the point of an opposition, especially 3 years out of an election or 2 years out of mayoral election, is to make the other side look bad. So they're going to have to come back. They're going to have to go in with bills that will make them look like the extremely, extremely, extremely annoying mother-in-law that says no to everything. That we will manage to, they will be able to manage to paint them in such a bad manner that then they will be becoming effective. But I still think that
I would actually challenge that a little bit, Sarah, because I would make the argument that the role of opposition and government is opposition is supposed to be the challenge to the government's positions and stances and ideas, but the whole system's predicated on everybody operating in some degree of good faith. And I think that we've seen in the past that there have been governments and oppositions that have been willing to work together collaboratively. I always go back to Greg Clark with my example because that man was a one-man opposition who managed to work with everybody. But I think that when people are operating in good faith, then for sure an opposition can be ineffective. But if the dynamic is reduced only to we're going to throw rocks at you because you're not going to listen to us, then I would argue that the systems have already to some degree failed. And I think that if we're saying that, what I want to see from the opposition, from the NDP, and you and I talked about this in the run-up to the election, is I want to see you tell me a story about what you can do and what you would do differently. And if you can't do that, then you're not an effective opposition. And I haven't seen that from the NDP since they lost government.
No,
100%.
for sure, 100%. 100% they need to correct their messaging on that, and they need to start acting. That's why I was suggesting that, first bill they want to introduce, but, they will have to introduce bill. They will have to stand up for something. They can't just sit there and not introduce anything. I think
history would say different.
Well, but the thing is, even if they introduce this stuff, it's like, I know we have, because of the system that we're in, we have to send the emails or we have to call our MLAs and all that other stuff. Me here, my MLA was Ron Orr. Thankfully, the guy is gone. Unfortunately, Jennifer Johnson is the replacement. There's no way in hell she's going to take my phone call. There's no way. So I don't even bother. It's a waste of my time and a waste of effort to try and communicate with them. My fear with when we're saying we have to get loud, and I totally agree, we have to get loud. The problem that we face is the fact that under Kenny and the UCP and an authoritarian dictatorship was the fact that they pushed all those bills through, in record number of bills that were pushed through during the pandemic under a guise of the Emergency Act. And one of those was Bill 1, which was that protect the infrastructure. And all they'll do anytime you got any sort of anti-government rally or any sort of momentum against the government or against Take Back Alberta, because I've said it, we've said it as a group, I've said it personally, that UCP is TBA. There's no difference between Take Back Alberta and the UCP. They are the one of the same. So when you're facing them, why can David Parker and the rest of them spew hate on public property? Because they're not going to be regulated by the police. mean, it was proven during when you had anti-protesters.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. I would say that I would, and here's the thing that's important to realize. I agree with everything you said up until the police bit. The reality is that the police during a protest have, and it sucks, don't get me wrong, but during a protest, the police have a very limited scope under which they can act in that moment. And especially when you're dealing with larger crowds, like we saw in Calgary, regrettably, one of the equations that gets calculated is, okay, where's the tipping point? Like, we have to protect property. We have to protect, people from harm. But if these people are doing dumb shit, if we go in and start arresting people, does that touch off a much bigger conflict? Are we better off to follow it up down the road? We saw that done with Arthur quite a bit, where Arthur would go do a protest, do and say dumb shit in the wrong places. And he would then, you'd get a live stream of Arthur getting served a ticket like 4 days later, because they'd send people by to give him a bunch of summons. So I just want to, I don't want this to veer into and the police are enabling this, because I do not believe for 1 second that that's what's happening.
Not necessarily enabling it, but they are and not necessarily all of them, because we can't say that all get through that whole thing, but it was proven in Edmonton, and the fact that the treatment of the anti-protesters was different than what was treated with the protesters. And
I would be careful with the word proven there, man.
Sorry.
Okay, but then let's look at it as and I'm talking as a person with white privilege. If I'm going to go and protest, the chances of me having a negative effect from the police, if I'm not causing any sort of damage or whatever, is going to be very limited. But if I was Indigenous or I was a member of the global majority, that's going to be a different conversation.
I think that really depends on the where and the when, and there's a lot of variables. I would not use that as a blanket statement, because I think that depending on the police force, and I'll use, because I have a little bit of knowledge on this, I will use the behavior of the Calgary police when they were involved in the riots in Toronto. There were for sure lots of police forces that did face criminal investigations and criminal charges, but the Calgary Police Service was one of the services, in fact, to my knowledge, the only service that did not face any investigation or charges because of the way that they conducted themselves. I know that it's tempting, and this is where, again, I get back to the, we can't talk about anything like it's a monolith, because I know that it's tempting to take a look at some of the behavior that we see from some police officers that is absolutely corrupt, that is absolutely criminal. I take nothing away from that. But to talk about the greater police force in that context, I think is not only
and also
a little bit disingenuous, I think it's dangerous.
We don't know what's happening in Common Center either, right? Yep. We need to look at Calgary this week. And there was the oil and gas summit, international summit that was happening. So resources were already stretched. And if the command office is making some decisions, they have thought about it over and over and over again. They had plans so I'm going to give you an example. My stepfather was one of the sergeants in charge of the Prime Minister's security. So one day he was in the command office. President Obama was there, so he was in charge of everybody's security, all the dignitaries and all that. And Obama decided to turn around the limousine and go on Buy Market to go buy cookies. They had to shut a whole block down. Did they knew that was going to happen? No. Have they treated everybody like garbage? No. They made it in a way, they adapt and they overcome the issues that are coming on their plates. And very often there are 6 scenarios of things that could go wrong or things that could happen. Those things are being discussed in advance and they have certain protocols for everything. So I would say like I have some clients that were in that area in Edmonton, everything was fine. So
Yeah, like, I mean, the bottom line is in any profession, and it's unfortunate. Don't get me wrong. I am not in any way defending garbage cops out there. Um, the bottom line is that in any profession, you're going to have people who are really, really good at what they do, and then you're going to have people who aren't really, really good at what they do, and then you're going to have people who just act in their self-interest. And there is no way to eliminate all of those people. So of course, we're going to have stories where there are people who abuse their positions in all professions. The reality is that when it comes to policing, I think that there are a lot of people who, there's a disproportionate amount of power that exists there. So when you have a bad cop do a bad thing, it's a really bad thing. But again, it comes back to that whole, if we start talking about any group like they're a monolith, we've lost the plot and we've lost the details. And I think that that's not a great way to talk about it. Do there need to be policing reforms? Of course there do. I've said that many, many times. I just think that we need to not speak in broad blanket statements about any demographic, because then we start to be doing exactly what David Parker's doing.
So is it fair enough? I mean, I've got my thoughts on things, and the whole thing right now, and I'll leave it at this because everyone's got to get some sort of sleep. But what when Sarah's saying yes, the NDP have to do something. I don't believe staying within the political structure that we have is going to do anything. Like, if you've got someone who is the leader of the opposition, who is a lawyer, why don't you use your law degree and look at what is the government doing, and not just the government, what are the individual MLAs, what is the premier doing that is illegal?
they're doing this 24/7, my friend.
Yeah, and like I said, when I was talking about and I'm not trying to give you a hard time or anything here, man. I want to be really clear about that. I just want to make sure that we're talking about what we're talking about, because when we talk about using the example that I used earlier tonight, where people were saying, oh, they're breaking the law about the referendum advertising. Well, you take a look at the laws, they're actually not. They do a lot of shady stuff, and they're very, very good at manipulating the system. There's no question about that. But they're very, very good at making sure that they're not making criminal decisions. They may feel morally criminal and they may feel ethically criminal, and I would argue that many of them are. I think that Smith doing what she's doing with the pension is a morally and ethically criminal thing to do, but it's not legally criminal. And I think that there's a big differentiation that needs to be made there, because I think that if somebody if the opposition had a smoking gun on any of the UCP MLAs or ministers doing something that was legitimately criminal, I'd be all over the news.
But also, if you're saying that the opposition can't do anything right now, we should just fucking give up, pack it, and go behind David Parker, because we're never gonna see the end of it. That's very much what you mean right now. And we can't be doing that. With all due respect, the opposition is the last resort that we have right now. So we can demand, we can ask them to do certain things, we can try to push some messaging, but we can't walk around saying that the opposition is no good anymore because of the current political system. We're all aware of the current political system, but if we're saying, well, fuck the opposition, they're not efficient, when then you lost the plot, you're giving up, and you're never going to be able to hold any one government accountable for next 4 years.
So I'll just interrupt you there for a moment. The unfortunate part, because of the way the UCP has built the Election Act, when they were in just before the last election, if I do anything with the official opposition, I'm colluding with the opposition.
Of course you do, but as a private citizen, you can say something. If you are representing yourself if you are introducing yourself as a concerned citizen, not the co-founder of the PAC, you can do something. Yes, Bill 87, it's all ingrained in my head. All ingrained, page 1 to 350. But if you present yourself as a private citizen who wants to talk to his MLA, who wants to talk to his NDP representative, then you're fine if you don't bring up your PAC. Of course but you know what? That anti-collusion line was good because we can hold both sides accountable. And I'm going to remind what happened with Jeff Davison during the 2021 election during the summer. It was pure collusion. That bill is
still, but it's still collusion. This is what I'm trying to get people to understand. Like when I said the 6 groups that are colluding with the UCP government. But
yeah,
because
but the challenge that you're going to run into there, man, is there's a difference between and this is the technicality that they get off on. I don't want to go too far into the weeds on this tonight, but the technicality that they're able to utilize is they will all say that they agree with the direction that the UCP is going, but you will not be able to find an email from
a visit record,
or any other record
lobbying
from
record, nothing.
the executive director of the Alberta First Initiative or anything like that to anybody in the context of, hey, I think you guys are great, and so I'm going to do this for you. That won't exist. And what Sarah's talking about is that there are for sure directions that people can push in the same way. And there are for sure vested interests that overlap, but again, you get down to the difference between what is technically legal and what is morally and ethically right or wrong. And I am not for a second saying that the way that any of these PACs are behaving, cough, True North, cough, pin tweet, cough, is morally or ethically right or wrong. What I'm saying is they're not breaking the law. And that sucks, but they're not.
No, that's fair enough. Like the whole issue I have is the fact that we have an ethics commissioner that can find no ethic breach in any.
Because there's no trace.
Man.
There's no trace.
No, it's not even about the trace. This is the biggest issue with the Ethics Act, and I wish that the people who had written the act had done a better job of naming the friggin' thing, because the Ethics Act, the Conflict of Interest Act, is not here's how you must behave. Here is a very narrow set of parameters. And it is, if you actually read the act, it's a very, very narrow set of parameters. And it is only within those parameters that the ethics commissioner can do the things that she can do.
Narrow.
She can't look at what's actually ethical. She can't look at what's actually moral. She can only look at within the confines of the act. Was the act breached?
Well, remember during the election,
sucks.
we had the ethics commissioner waiting on a matter, and she was like, guys, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah. She's got no, the most that she can do is refer to the speaker and say, here's what I found, or refer, if there's actual criminal evidence, she can refer to the appropriate policing organization. But in regards to the powers that the ethics commissioner has, she's extraordinary. It's a terribly named office, and anybody who's ever had to deal with the ethics commissioner and has gotten a letter back from the ethics commissioner can attest to the fact that it is a terribly, terribly named office. And that's it. It's like somebody said, here's my Ferrari Mestarossa, and then gave you a boxcar. Like, it's just, it sure sounds like the real thing, but it's definitely not.
Just like the time and
Exactly. It's off brand. Anyways, anything else you wanted to add there real quick before I move on to Cassandra?
No, we're good.
All right, cool. Thanks, man. You have a good night, and we're going to bring in Cassandra next. Cassandra, what's going on?
Oh, hello there.
Hey.
How's it going?
All good. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Still trying to find a place to live, but I have to get my bearings there. I was getting distracted with what I wanted to say with the last conversation. So I was thinking about, I've been listening to the show, listening to what did you call him? Mutant Ninja Turtleneck
Oh,
or
Teenage
whatever
Mutant
his
Ninja
name is.
Turtleneck.
And and the whole CPP debacle. And there's words that I yell in my head every time that I can't say. But it really got me thinking about this definition. So I'm going to read you a couple of definitions without telling you what they're for, because the first definition was the way I was taught. It means to, if someone debases themselves for personal gain. But I decided to go to the Webster's dictionary. And in the Webster's dictionary, it's a person who deliberately debases his or her talents as for money. The Cambridge, my other favorite dictionary, the Cambridge Dictionary says to use yourself, your abilities, or beliefs in a way that does not deserve respect, especially in order to get money. Any idea what that's the definition to?
I mean, I could take a couple of guesses, but I'm just going to show how like not on the ball I am.
That is the definition of prostitute.
Okay.
And that's all I've got to say about Parker and the CPP. But the other point that I wanted to make, and it's going to be short, but I was thinking about that whole awful rally and the assertions being made that somehow children being exposed to people that are from the LGBTQ community is somehow going to turn them a certain way. I raised my daughter in the West End of Vancouver, just off of Davie Street. And she knew, but I think she was 5 the first time she said to me, she said, "You know what, Mommy? Some boys like to kiss boys and some girls like to kiss girls." And I went, "Wow, you noticed," because for much of the part of her most formative years, we lived there and we went to the coffee shop and had a group of friends, and some of those friends were heterosexual people, and some of them were trans people, and some of them were drag performers, and some of them were every part of the rainbow you can think of. And even after all that exposure, which these people think is indoctrination, even after all of that, and I never told her what to think, she was just exposed to it on a daily basis. She still somehow, I don't know, grew up to be a beautiful white heterosexual woman in a heterosexual relationship, a very happy heterosexual relationship. So that's all I have to say tonight.
When I was in Montreal, I'm going to tell you a quick story before we go. Me and my friends, we would always go in what we call the Quartier Gay in Montreal district. Gay bars, social bars, and everything. It's fantastic. And do you know why we were going there? Because we were feeling safe. Did that make me?
Ditto. Same thing in Vancouver with me. That's all us girls did. That's where we hung out, because, and even if there was heterosexual guys that went there because they figured out, oh, that's where the girls went, but it was still safe, and it was just safe.
Am I married to a man today? Yes. Did it change the outcome of who or what I would be doing or who I would be attracted to? No, because you are who you are. It's not that you don't want to be bothered by douchebag on St. Lawrence Street at 2:00 in the morning. That makes you a lesbian. It's because you're going out to enjoy your time, feel safe, not being worried about pills being put in your drink, and you just want to fucking dance. And you are welcome. That's it.
There you go.
All right.
Cassandra, thank you so much. I always love hearing your stories.
No problem.
I'm going to bring in Lynn, who's been patiently waiting, if she's still there. And then I'm going to let Sarah have a couple of last words. Then we're going to do the wrap up because this is going on. I'm going to have to cut this up into a two-parter again because we're coming up to hour 3 here. But Lynn, what's going on?
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hi. Well, it's been a rough political week in this household, let me tell you.
I believe it.
First of all, I was really proud of Fort McMurray. The Pride community decided to stay away from the protests for fear of, hatred and harm to other people. So that ended up being a good thing. I was bothered by watching the protest, but nevertheless, the public and Catholic schools worked really well together, put out a joint statement after. All the doors were locked. It was okay. I was bothered by Calgary, of course, but whatever. But when it comes to the pension plan, that's my main thing tonight. It was a heated discussion. And I finally ended up saying to my husband, okay, if 4 million people can take out over half of the pension fund, what does that tell you? And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, it means we're selfish. And if everyone in Canada was as selfish as we are stating, or Danielle is stating right now, you, based on your diagnosis, would never have been allowed 39 MRIs for free. And that's a fact. So we need to think about this. We're Canadians, like Nate said, first. And we are here to protect other people. That's what Tommy Douglas did with the Health Act. And that relates to all other topics. But
I love that
that's
point.
where I am about that.
I love that point. And I think you're 100% right. Are we working for the greater good of everybody, or are we working for ourselves? And that's
yes.
That's good, Lynn. That's good.
Canadians are not selfish. No. Albertans are not the majority of Canadians.
And I think it's also, I just want to highlight, like, I think that there's obviously a few Albertans that need some adjusting, but the reality is I think that, I have, it's only been the regular talking heads that I've seen by and large who have been like, oh yeah, this Alberta pension plan thing, this sounds great. Most everybody that I've run into since Thursday, both online when I know who they are and in real life, everybody's been like, what the hell is going on? I think that the support for this thing is interminably low. And I think that it's going to be, I cannot figure out the political calculus that Danielle Smith is putting into this because
it's creative accounting.
What's that?
It's creative accounting. Sorry.
Yeah, but like, I don't understand how this works out well for her at the end of the day. There's no universe that I can picture where this is going to get enough votes to become a thing. Like, it's not.
What if they're trying to kibosh her again?
Then she's running head first into a wall, which wouldn't be terribly off brand, but like, nonetheless, it's wild to me.
I think we also have to take into perspective, like, Nate, I told you I was going to watch the painful Whistle Stop Cafe.
Brave of you.
I know, with David Parker. And I asked some really good questions. I wasn't trying to be rude. And of course, none of my questions got answered. I was really impressed with Parker on how he can change his speech to become normal. I'm just an Albertan, blah, 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 from what I saw the other day in Calgary. He's really good at what he does.
Yep.
And I did get a response back from Chris this morning on Facebook stating that he tried to do it in private, but I have him blocked, which is an outright lie because I checked and I don't have him blocked. Trying to see whether he could have some neutral ground with me, but based on my Facebook page with the COVID shot information and how I don't protect children, he realized that he had nothing that he could be in tune with me for. But I listened to it all and I watched the comments and I went back and looked at them. And I thought, I think it was under 400 comments. And there was only 2 of us who were on the opposite side. So take that away. And I thought, you know what, Lynn, you got to take this into perspective. There's 4 million people here.
Yep.
And there's under 400 people commenting on this page. So I think we need to keep that in mind too. David Parker scares the crap out of me, yes. But we just need to keep working to combat that. Let's put it that way. Anyway, that's enough. You guys are tired.
No,
and
that's...
Thank you for a great show.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. And I couldn't agree with you more, because I think at the end of the day, the thing that David Parker has gotten good at, and the reason why he's in the position that he's in, is because he's able to mobilize a small group of people where they are the minority. They are the people who normally wouldn't have a platform. He's been able to coalesce them extraordinarily well, and he's been able to pack them all together to influence. I mean, like the UCP is saying right now, oh, we got 3,000 people coming out for our AGM, and that's a tremendous record for us. And I have no doubts that it is, but to get a majority of 3,000 people, you only need 1,501 people. And if you can't, I mean, you can't rub together 2 sticks in this province without finding at least 10 people who are aggrieved about something that's bullshit. So if you've got the network, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. And that's what David Parker has done, is he's realized that if you lean into all of the cliches, all of the messages, all of the conspiracy theories, and you tell everybody, here's the thing that we got to fight for, and we got to overlook each other's nonsense on all of the other things and just pretend we didn't hear it, then you can get together enough people to take over small things. And so far, we're talking about a UCP leadership race. We're talking about UCP AGMs. He's taken over small things.
Hey, Nate, I think we should finish the show with the Worldwide Freedom Parade that occurred today downtown Calgary.
I'm going to save that for tomorrow's tweet, because we just got one other person who tapped in here, and I want to give, we got new people. I want to give them the opportunity to speak. We've got Earth Angel.
I need water. I'll be right back.
I want to break into some doo-wop all of a sudden, but Earth Angel, if you unmute yourself, what have you got? And if you don't unmute yourself, then there's nothing that I can do for you. And I don't think Earth Angel's going to unmute themselves. So we're going to call that a show, because we're almost 3 hours in, and that's absolute insanity. This is the part where, Sarah, you got 30. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to any final thoughts, then I'm going to wrap things up.
It's been a week. Call your MLA, call the critics, call the Premier's office, wait half hour, send letters, send letters, send letters, send letters, because they need to acknowledge them and stamp them one by one. That's how it works. Send letters. Send as much correspondence. Keith.
Oh, you're reading the comments. I'm going to kick you out right there.
I went to his restaurant.
All right, Sarah.
Anyways, send correspondence. Letters, super awesome, because everybody has to stamp and they're going to be swarmed with paperwork and they can't get rid of it.
There you go. All right, Sarah Biggs, thank you so much for topping in tonight. Now's the part where I do the plugs. So here's the shameless plugs part of the show. You may have noticed it's getting colder outside. That's my advertising voice right there, because yeah, I'm going to try to show you some of our new product lines. We just got these. I got the email about these today. With the weather turning, so is our merch line. I'm so bad at this. We got hoodies, and we got toques. I'm excited for the toques. I'm actually going to order me one, because I have a weakness for hats, as anybody who's watched the show for any length of time is probably fully aware. But we got official breakdown hoodies. We got official breakdown toques, and that goes in line with all of the other merch that we have. We have a couple of other hoodies. We have the mugs, which are my personal favorite. I just really love the mugs. I literally have coffee out of mine almost every morning. So all of this is available on the website abpoly.ca. You can also get There's a lot to unpack here t-shirts, as well as the Keep the Conversation Going t-shirts. And I hear good things. I know a couple of folks have ordered them. They've said that they're quite happy with it. Again, I will plug the mugs ad infinitum. And that's, I think, it for the evening. This is going to be a two-parter. I'm going to break this up into two parts because this is coming on to 3 hours, and that's a lot to ask out of anyone. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has hung on this long for the live presentation of this show, whether or not you've been in the chats on the YouTubes and the Facebooks. I noticed that the Facebooks got a lot quieter after we did a little bit of pruning on some of the folks that were coming in and saying some things. So that's kind of nice. But it's good to see all the regulars in there. Thank you so much for coming in, sharing your thoughts. And I love the networking that's going on in there. That's super fantastic. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's hung out on the Twitter Spaces or the X Spaces as well. And anybody who's listening to the podcast version, the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform, leave us a little review. They help. If you're watching on the YouTubes, like and subscribe, smash that subscribe button, as the kids say. And as always, if you're looking for a way to get access to our interview episodes, you can do that by signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where we post all of our interview episodes early. And we have a couple coming up again. We're going to take a little bit of break for a couple of weeks because there's a lot going on. But we have a couple more coming up that we're excited to be releasing. Those will be available in the next couple of weeks or two. And we are still just putting the finishing touches on our breakthrough interview with one of the top brass for Take Back Alberta. It's going to be a spicy one, I promise. It's going to be so good. We're just getting the last little figures in place to make it work. So you can watch for that as well, coming out soon. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who weighed in tonight and everybody who's listening. And as always, there's a lot going on. It was a nutty week. There's lots of indication it's just going to continue on that route for the next little bit up until the legislature resumes at the end of October. So make sure you're taking time to take care of yourself. Make sure you're giving yourself a break. Find something that you enjoy doing, even if it's just, playing Minecraft or something. It's a fun little game. I hear people YouTube about it. I'm not sure, though. But take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.